Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story so soaked in power plays, palace drama, and high-stakes romance that honestly, you probably won't survive this. At least not without questioning everything you thought you knew about Cleopatra. She's not just that eyeliner icon with a golden headdress. She's the last pharaoh of Egypt, a master of languages, and possibly the most misunderstood queen in history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your corner of the world? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born into a palace that smells like polished cedar, incense and sea salt drifting in from Alexandria's bustling harbour. Outside, traders shout in Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic as ships groan under the weight of silk, papyrus and amphorae full of wine. Inside, marble echoes with the soft slap of sandals and whispered secrets. You are Cleopatra the 7th Philippa, daughter of Ptolemy the 12th, known less than affectionately by his people as Orleats, the flute player, which is basically ancient shade for guy who parties too much and governs too little. Your family? Yeah, they're Greek, descended from Ptolemy the First Soter, a general of Alexander the Great. And that means one thing: you're ruling an Egyptian kingdom from the top of a Greek dynasty that's been lounging on the throne for centuries. No one's forgetting you're foreign and most definitely not Egyptian in blood. But the people might forgive that, if you can act the part better than anyone else has. The Ptolemies don't do normal, they do drama. Your ancestors married their siblings to keep the bloodline pure, which is royal code for "we trust no one but ourselves." It works out exactly as well as you'd expect. Murders, betrayals, throne grabs, they make Game of Thrones look like a polite dinner party. You, unfortunately, are born smack in the middle of one of these power vacuums. Your father is exiled, then reinstated by a Roman army, yes, with a lot of bribes, and your early years are basically spent ducking under tapestries and watching uncles vanish into dungeons. You grow up fast, like read 5 languages before breakfast fast. By 10, you're already outsmarting tutors and learning to read the room, not just in Greek, but in Egyptian, Latin, and even bits of Hebrew and Aramaic. Unlike the rest of your family, you're not content to play Greek dress-up on Egyptian soil. You study Egyptian religious customs, learn their gods, their festivals, their moods. You're the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to bother speaking Egyptian. This may seem like a small thing, but it's huge. You're not just ruling the people, you're telling them, "I see you." And in an empire riddled with famine, riots, and a growing dependence on unpredictable Roman alliances, being seen might be the only thing keeping the palace from crumbling beneath you. But don't get too comfortable in your golden cradle. Even as a child, you sense that nothing is stable in Alexandria. You're raised in a court where smiling at the wrong person could end with a goblet of poisoned wine. There are bronze statues of your ancestors lining the halls, but half of them were murdered by the other half. Every feast is a chessboard, and every sibling is both a blood relative and a potential threat. You learn to watch your back while also learning geometry, multitasking queen style. Here's something quirky. There's a rumour, even in your lifetime, that your mother might have been Egyptian, maybe a priestess, or a concubine elevated to queen. No one can confirm it. The records are blurry, shredded by time or deliberately edited. Scholars today still argue over it, passionately. If it's true, it makes you even more of a hybrid, a ruler who bridges 2 worlds, rather than pretending to live in just one. It would also mean your bond with Egypt isn't just political, it's personal. In the wider world, things are shifting. Rome is eating everything. The Republic is a hungry beast, snapping up lands and alliances, and your kingdom is technically independent, just deeply, deeply in debt to them. Your father left you more gold necklaces than actual gold. Every time Egypt has a problem, Rome charges a fee to help, like some mob boss offering protection. You're growing up in a kingdom propped up by IOUS. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Julius Caesar is slicing his way through Gaul, charming senators while plotting how to be more than just a politician. His shadow, though still distant, looms long over your future. You've probably never met him, but you've heard of him. Everyone has. Rome is already a factor in your life before it ever sends ships to your shore. What's debated among historians is just how much agency you had at this age. Were you already manoeuvring behind the scenes, whispering strategies to your father, or were you simply observing, waiting, growing sharper? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You were a child, yes, but one with a front row seat to the fragility of power. You understood that rulers fall not just because of swords, but because they forget to read the people, or worse, underestimate their own family. And yet, despite all this chaos, you dream of being more than a puppet queen, more than a royal daughter waiting for marriage to secure her worth. You want to rule in your own right, not behind a man, not beside a Roman, but as Pharaoh in the full weight of that word. It's a dangerous dream, a costly one, but it's also the only way forward in a kingdom where your bloodline is both your curse and your weapon. By the time you're in your early teens, you're already watching the court through half-lidded eyes, learning to smile without giving anything away. You know what it means when a senator visits twice in a week, or when your brother suddenly starts wearing new rings. You know that to survive here, you can't just be brilliant. You have to be irresistible, unpredictable, and patient. You may not know it yet, but you're going to outlast kings, seduce emperors, and walk straight into the pages of history. But first, you'll have to survive your own family. So here you are, growing up in the most luxurious trap on earth. The royal palace in Alexandria gleams under the sun, a massive estate of marble colonnades, silken drapes, peacock-filled gardens, and sea breezes carrying the scent of jasmine and brine. But let's not get too dreamy about it. This place is a glittering cage, a bird cage the size of a kingdom. Everything is watched, everyone is listening, and every step you take could trigger a future betrayal. You're still young, barely more than a child, but already expected to carry yourself with the calculated grace of a goddess. The halls are echoing with whispers. Servants bow, but their eyes linger too long. Courtiers smile, then exchange glances when your back is turned. You've learned to decipher these things, like reading smoke for signs of fire. You can tell who's secretly rooting for your half-sister Arsinoe, who's drifting toward your father's latest scheme, and who just wants to stay alive long enough to retire in peace. And yet, you thrive. This is your world now. You memorize not just books, but people. You read scrolls about Homer and Herodotus by day, and recite Egyptian hymns to Isis at night. Your tutors are some of the finest minds of the Hellenistic world, philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, and you devour knowledge like it's figs soaked in honey. One of them even swears you're the smartest student he's ever had, which is saying something considering he once taught a king. And it's not just about facts. You're learning the language of power. You study rhetoric until your voice can shift from silk to steel in a single sentence. You practice subtlety, charm, manipulation, tools no less lethal than the daggers tucked into your father's robes. And somewhere along the line you realize something unnerving. You like it. Not the lying or the danger, but the control. The feeling of knowing things other people don't. The ability to guide conversations, plant ideas, bend loyalty without force. It's not just survival, it's strategy. Here's the fun twist. The same Roman historians who later mock you for being a temptress also admit, often begrudgingly, that your intelligence was terrifying. Not just sharp, but magnetic. Even centuries later, Cleopatra isn't remembered as the most beautiful woman who ever lived. Because even then, they knew that wasn't the real story. The power was always in the way you made people feel like they were in on something bigger, deeper, something ancient and divine. But let's zoom back in, because while you're busy outlearning everyone in your palace, your father is, well, not the most stable guy. Ptolemy XII spends most of his reign buying Roman support to keep his throne, which empties Egypt's treasury and makes him deeply unpopular. Riots break out. The Alexandrians, who have a particular flair for public outrage, literally throw statues of him into the sea. Eventually he's forced to flee to Rome, begging for protection while promising temples and gold in return. And that's how you end up watching your kingdom fray from the edges. While your father's off bribing senators, the people turn to your older sister Berenice IV. She declares herself queen in his absence, and depending on who you ask, she might have been better at it. But power claimed without Roman permission is never secure. Rome eventually sends an army to reinstate your dad, and he returns with vengeance in his eyes. Berenice is executed, along with a few of her advisors for good measure, and just like that you get your first real glimpse at what happens when power slips out of your grasp. It's not just titles that are lost, it's lives, siblings, futures. This changes you. You can feel it. Maybe you used to hope that you could charm your way through the royal maze, that being clever and polite might be enough, but now you understand. You'll need to be ruthless too. And here's a strange fact not many people mention. You were likely co-ruler with your father in his final years. Not officially crowned, not publicly declared, but behind closed doors. You were already sitting in on council meetings, already taking notes, already watching the wheels turn. So by the time he dies in 51 BCE, you're not some wide-eyed girl plucked from her scrolls and thrown onto a throne. You're ready, not just prepared, eager. And yet, of course, it's not that simple. Because when your father dies, he leaves behind a will, a Roman-sanctioned will. And guess what it says? You're to rule jointly with your 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. Yes, 10. As in, still dropping food on his robes and asking where clouds go at night. The reality? You are queen in all but name. You're the one with the experience, the charisma, the connection to Egypt's gods. But officially, you're supposed to share power with a boy barely able to form full sentences in political Greek. Even worse, you're expected to marry him. Welcome to the Ptolemaic family business. The early days of this arrangement are tense. The palace becomes a battleground of influence. You have your supporters, priests, scholars, military commanders who admire your vision. But your brother is a puppet, and someone's pulling his strings. Likely the eunuch Pothinus, a palace official with ambitions of his own. Suddenly, decrees are being issued in Ptolemy XIII's name only. Coins appear with just his face on them. Your name starts getting erased, your titles trimmed. You are being slowly, methodically, written out of power, and you feel it, the invisible noose tightening. One night a trusted servant vanishes. Another you overhear whispers outside your chamber door. The marble floors seem colder. The guards don't meet your gaze. Alexandria is no longer your city. It's slipping away, one dagger smile at a time. Then it happens. A soft coup. You're forced to flee the palace in the night. Not in a grand chariot. Not with fanfare. You leave like a ghost, vanishing into the desert with only a few loyal followers. Your sister Arsinoe stays behind, probably watching from a high window, already calculating her move. The great queen, the scholar, the goddess in the making, exiled. Just another fallen royal. But here's where your story bends. Because you don't disappear. You don't retreat into bitterness or wait passively for Rome to intervene. You start plotting. With the Nile stretching beside you like a coiled serpent, you make alliances with local armies. You charm tribal leaders. You fund mercenaries. And all the while you're listening for the next shift in the wind. Then word reaches you. A Roman general has landed in Alexandria. Not just any Roman, Julius Caesar himself. And just like that, the game resets. So now you're in exile, technically defeated, politically erased. But Cleopatra doesn't do disappearing. You're out in the desert, but still very much in the game. While your brother's advisors throw parades and pretend he's king by divine right, you're camped on the edge of Egypt, breathing dust and plotting harder than ever. It's hot, dry, and utterly inconvenient for royal living. But your mind is sharper out here, away from the echoing marble and poison smiles. You've traded silk for sand, yes, but power? That's just shifted forms. And right when things look like they couldn't get any more chaotic, a Roman general lands in Alexandria. A big one. Not just big, the big one. Julius Caesar, fresh off a civil war of his own, comes gliding into your kingdom, dragging the ghost of Pompey behind him, and looking for rest, refuge, and probably a new problem to solve. You hear the news while surrounded by the low, crackling firelight of your desert camp. Caesar is in the city. To the rest of the world, this is a storm rolling in. To you, it's a door flung open. Now, Julius Caesar isn't exactly your average soldier. He's in his 50s, balding a little, famously vain about his appearance. But don't let the receding hairline fool you. He's one of the most dangerous men in the world, with a reputation for brilliance, ambition and charm that can disarm a senate or seduce an enemy mid-negotiation. He's technically here to settle the dispute between you and your brother, which, let's be honest, means he'll pick whoever serves Rome's interest best. And that's when you know. You can't just show up and ask for help. You need to perform. You need to make Caesar remember you, not as a problem, but as a possibility. A queen worth backing, a partner worth protecting. And that's how you end up creating one of the most famous entrances in history. You don't walk in with servants or gifts or a boring scroll of complaints. No, you smuggle yourself into the palace under cover of night, wrapped tightly in a linen sack or, depending on who's telling the story, rolled dramatically into a carpet. Either way, the result is the same. A royal woman, defiant, bold, and absolutely not invited, unfurling at Caesar's feet like a spell. You appear before him in a swirl of fabric and nerve, and suddenly the cold Roman general is faced with something he didn't expect. A queen who doesn't beg. You dare. Here's the fun part. Historians still debate this moment like it's a courtroom drama. Was the carpet thing real? Or just Roman propaganda to make you seem more theatrical and exotic? Some say it was invented by later writers who loved a good image. Others say, no, you really did it, and it worked. What's more important than the truth of it is what it says. That you were willing to risk everything, roll the dice with your life wrapped in cloth, and walk straight into the lion's den. And Caesar? He's impressed, amused, curious, maybe a little enchanted. He's not used to women who challenge him. He's used to patrician Roman wives and mistresses who know their place. But you arrive with fire in your eyes and politics in your veins. You speak his language, literally, and you've read the same books. You don't flirt, you spar. And by the end of the night, one thing is clear. You're no longer in exile, you're in orbit. It helps, of course, that your country is strategically important to Rome. Egypt is wealthy, positioned perfectly for grain exports, and teetering on the edge of chaos. Caesar wants stability, but more importantly, he wants legacy. And there you are, beautiful, brilliant, and offering both. So the two of you strike up something that's part alliance, part romance, part, well, whatever two alpha players create when they realise the world could burn and they'd still be trying to outwit each other. Your enemies naturally panic. Pothinus, the puppet master behind your brother, realises what's happening and tries to strike fast. He orchestrates a siege of the royal palace. Alexandria, that glittering intellectual jewel of the ancient world, turns into a war zone overnight. Smoke clouds the city. Ships burn in the harbour. At one point, part of the Great Library, yes, that one, goes up in flames. Books lost forever in a fire started because you rolled yourself into a meeting. The Alexandrian War rages for months. Caesar's trapped in the palace with a small force, you at his side. Supplies run low, riots break out, and yet you remain. There's a chance to flee, but you don't take it. You stay in the city, not because it's safe, but because this is your stand. You're not going to lose Egypt from the sidelines. At some point you probably realise you're pregnant. Maybe you suspected, maybe Caesar already knew. Either way, this changes everything. Not just a child, his child. Not a Roman bastard hidden in shame, but a symbol. A living embodiment of your alliance. Caesarian he'll be called, Little Caesar. And whether or not Rome ever accepts him, he's your legacy now. A son born not just of passion, but of strategy. A future king, or at least a final card to play. Eventually Caesar's reinforcements arrive. The siege is broken. Pothinus is captured and executed. Your brother Ptolemy XIII, he tries to flee, falls into the Nile and drowns, his golden armour dragging him under like a poetic footnote. Just like that, you win. Not just your throne back, but control of the entire kingdom. You install your even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as co-ruler, because Egyptian politics still demand that symbolic marriage thing. But make no mistake, you are now queen in every way that matters. And here's a strange little tidbit. The Egyptians accept it. They not only accept you, they embrace you. Despite your Greek blood, despite your alliance with a Roman invader, the people love the idea of a strong pharaoh again. Especially one who speaks their language, worships their gods, and seems to carry the favour of both Isis and Rome. You don't just rule from a throne, you sit in temples, you ride in festivals, you are divine again, a living goddess, crowned in lotus and gold. But even as the dust settles in Alexandria, you know the storm is far from over. Caesar will eventually return to Rome, and when he does, what happens to you? What happens to Caesarion? What happens to Egypt if your protector is suddenly not there to protect? The war is over, yes, but the real game? That's just beginning. You're back in the palace now. No more desert exile, no more dust-covered strategies under starlit skies. Just silk cushions, columns taller than any tree, and the faint scent of incense curling through corridors where your name is once again spoken with reverence. You've done it. You've taken back the throne, reasserted your power, and now, for the first time, you get to rule not as someone's daughter or someone's sister, but as the pharaoh. Even if on paper you're still sharing the throne with your younger brother Ptolemy XIV, everyone knows who's really running the show. But let's not pretend things are suddenly simple. You've survived a civil war, but you're still surrounded by your family, which, as you've learned, is like sitting in a room full of snakes and pretending they're decorative. Your sister Arsinoe is now imprisoned after leading her own faction during the Alexandrian War. Caesar takes her back to Rome in chains to parade her through the streets in a triumphal procession. It's a Roman custom, meant to show off their power. Look who we beat, basically. But Arsinoe survives it, oddly enough, and is exiled to a temple in Ephesus instead of executed. You file that detail away. Family has a way of reappearing. Your new brother-husband, Ptolemy XIV, is all of 12 years old. He plays the part, wears the crown, attends rituals, but he's a child, which makes him a convenient shield, a useful placeholder for the traditions of the dynasty while you, the true ruler, get down to business. You've got a kingdom to stabilize, grain to export, trade routes to reopen, temples to restore, and most of all, you've got to keep Rome interested, but not too interested. That's the balance now. You're walking a tightrope between independence and alliance. You've seen firsthand what happens to kingdoms Rome doesn't like. They disappear, quickly, bloodily. You're not going to let that happen. So you write letters, send envoys, keep your tone respectful but never weak. You rule Egypt as a sovereign, but you keep a respectful nod toward Rome, like a cat that lets you pet it, but still looks like it might eat your face. And then there's Caesar. After the war, he stays in Egypt for several months. Months. This is a man who's supposed to be restoring order to the Roman Republic, who's got enemies stacking up back home like unpaid debts, and yet, here he is, reclining on your couch, drinking your wine, discussing philosophy under the stars while the Nile flows by. The gossip in Rome must be unbearable. You sail together down the Nile on a grand barge, draped in purple sails and gold trim, trailing music and poetry through the air like perfume. Historians will later debate the point of that journey. Was it a royal honeymoon? A propaganda tour to impress the locals? A vacation for a tired general and his new queen? No one can agree. But for you, it's something else entirely. It's a statement. You're showing Egypt, and maybe the world, that Caesar isn't just your ally. He's your partner. The most powerful man in the Roman world has travelled thousands of miles and stayed, not to conquer, but to stand beside you. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. Back in Rome, Caesar's enemies, especially the old-school senators, are starting to mutter. First, he's declared himself dictator for life, which is a red flag to say the least. Then there's the whole Cleopatra situation. Some say he's become too indulgent. Others say you've bewitched him. The truth is probably much simpler. You're both political geniuses who see in each other a mirror of ambition. That, and you're giving him something no Roman woman could, an heir. Which brings us to Caesarion, your son. Born in Egypt, raised in a palace built for gods, and watched like a living prophecy. Some say he looks just like Caesar. Others claim the resemblance is more symbolic than physical. Rome, for its part, officially ignores him. Caesar never formally names him his heir. That honour goes to his great-nephew Octavian, but in your eyes, and in Egypt's, Caesarion is the continuation of both lines, Ptolemaic and Roman, a future king of kings. You have plans for him, big ones. Here's a curious little fringe fact. There are stories, whispered long after your death, that you considered trying to move to Rome permanently. That Caesar might have made you his queen, not just in Egypt, but in the heart of the Republic. Imagine that. Cleopatra, not just as pharaoh, but as empress of the known world. Would the Roman people ever have accepted it? Would the Senate have allowed a foreign queen to sit beside their most powerful citizen? The debate burns even now in scholarly circles, fueled by fragments, hints, rumours. No one can prove it, but the possibility lingers, heavy as perfume in a closed room. Of course, Rome never lets anything that interesting happen without trying to stab it first. In 44 BCE, Caesar is assassinated. March 15th. The Ides. You hear the news as it crosses the Mediterranean, and for a moment everything stops. The man you tied your future to, the man who gave you back your throne, fathered your child, and anchored your political strategy, is gone. Killed by his own senate, betrayed by friends, knifed under the guise of saving the Republic. Your position is suddenly more fragile than it's ever been. You don't panic, though. That's not your style. You retreat. Quietly. Carefully. You take Caesarion back to Egypt. You remove Ptolemy XIV from the picture. He dies, suspiciously, shortly after Caesar's death. And let's be honest, there's probably poison involved. You never announce it, but your fingerprints are likely on that chalice. You crown your son co-ruler at just 3 years old. He is now Ptolemy XV Caesarion, King of Egypt, at least in name. You will rule in his stead, of course, as regent, as mother, as queen. This is a moment of transformation for you. The Cleopatra who rolled herself into a carpet. She was bold, charming, calculated. But this Cleopatra, she's steel wrapped in silk. You've outlived Caesar. You've protected your kingdom. You're raising a god. You also know you won't have long before Rome comes knocking again. This time, not with questions, but with legions. So now you're Queen of Egypt in every real sense of the word. You've got the throne. You've got the child heir. The power dynamic between Rome and Alexandria is shifting, and you're not planning to sit back and wait to see where the pieces fall. Caesar is dead. Yes, but you're not. And the game doesn't stop just because one player flips the board. If anything, this is when the real game begins. You're ruling Egypt solo, but the stage has widened. Rome is unravelling again, because of course it is. Caesar's death has left a blood-soaked vacuum at the heart of the Republic, and now it's a three-way standoff between his great-nephew Octavian, his general Mark Antony, and the slippery politician Lepidus. Together they form something called the Second Triumvirate, which sounds more stable than it actually is. They pretend to get along, but you know how that ends. Spoiler alert, not well. From your gleaming throne in Alexandria, you keep your eyes on Rome and wait. It's a waiting game, yes, but it's not idle. Egypt needs shoring up. You rebuild your administration, invest in grain and trade, and keep your temples humming with life. You do all of this while quietly reminding your people that you're not just a ruler, you're divine. The living embodiment of Isis. Your coins show you with a strong jaw, a steady gaze, and a royal cobra poised on your brow. You're not interested in playing the delicate seductress anymore. You want people to see you and feel the weight of history behind your eyes. Still, things aren't exactly safe. Just because you're technically sharing the throne with your son Caesarion doesn't mean people won't try to test you. You've already seen what sibling rivalry in your family looks like. It ends with exiles and accidental drownings. So, you do what any ruler in your position would do. You eliminate threats, quietly, efficiently. The kind of housekeeping that history books gloss over with words like consolidation and reform. But make no mistake, you're removing rivals, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. That's the throne's tax. And then one day, a message arrives. It's from Mark Antony, the man who'd once fought beside Caesar, helped avenge him, and now commands the eastern Roman provinces. He wants to meet. Not in Rome, not in battle. In Tarsus, a city in modern-day Turkey, right on the edge of the empire. He wants you to come to him. And that's adorable. Because Antony clearly doesn't know who he's dealing with yet. You don't go to Roman men. You don't answer summons like some junior diplomat hoping for a pat on the head. No. When Cleopatra enters a room, it becomes a spectacle. So you plan one, a big one. You sail into Tarsus on a golden barge with purple sails fluttering in the wind and oars of silver flashing in the sunlight. Musicians play as the scent of incense drifts from the deck. You're dressed as Aphrodite, goddess of love, lounging beneath a canopy while attendants wave fans of peacock feathers. It's not subtle. It's not even close to subtle. And that's the point. Mark Antony, brash, boastful, famously indulgent, is about to be overwhelmed. And it works. Oh, it so works. Antony meets you expecting diplomacy and maybe some sweet talking. What he gets is a full-on mythological experience. You don't even speak at first. You just let him absorb the visual. Cleopatra, goddess on a barge, floating into his life like a living poem. By the time you actually open your mouth, he's already half entranced. And then you seal the deal, with wit, intelligence, and just the right dose of flirtation. You don't just seduce him, you make him feel chosen. Like Rome is something you'll allow to orbit you, if it behaves. This is where your partnership with Antony begins, not just romantically, but strategically. He needs Egypt's wealth, especially for his campaigns in the east. You need Rome's military protection and a political counterweight to Octavian. It's not love at first sight, although it might have felt that way to the poets. It's mutual usefulness, wrapped in flirtation and dipped in luxury. You return to Egypt together, and for a while it's a golden time. Antony moves into your palace. The two of you host legendary banquets, famously extravagant to the point of absurdity. One of your favourite pastimes is to outdo yourselves with displays of wealth. One story claims you dissolved a pearl in vinegar just to win a bet. Historians today think the pearl would have needed hours to dissolve, but hey, never let chemistry get in the way of good theatre. But here's something to keep in mind. While the Roman world sees you as this decadent duo of disaster, Alexandria sees something different. The people love Antony. He embraces Egyptian customs, dresses in their style, participates in rituals. To them, he's not some invading general. He's a new pharaoh, standing beside their queen. The court begins to resemble an old-school Hellenistic revival, a fusion of Greek luxury, Egyptian spirituality and Roman force. And the children, yes, there are children. You and Antony have twins first, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Later, another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Your dynasty is growing, expanding. You imagine a future where your children rule vast territories, where Egypt and the Eastern Roman world become a single stable realm under your lineage. You're not just building an empire, you're trying to shape legacy. But don't get comfortable. You know how this goes. Back in Rome, Octavian is watching, and he's not amused. The rumours filtering in from Alexandria are scandalous, even by Roman standards. Banquets, orgies, titles, gods, and children born of a foreign queen. He's trying to present himself as the moral restorer of the Republic, and here you are, living proof that Caesar was never going to settle for a Roman wife and a quiet Senate seat. A debate still rages in historical circles. Was Antony truly in love with you, or just lost in the luxurious fog of your world? Was it passion or manipulation? The records are biased. Roman historians eager to paint you as the witch queen who corrupted a noble Roman. But honestly, that says more about their anxieties than your intentions. If you were a man, they'd call you brilliant. Since you're a woman, they call you dangerous. What they can't deny is that you're winning. Your hold over Egypt is solid. Your influence over Antony is growing. Your children represent a powerful hybrid dynasty. And Rome is nervous. That means you're doing something right. But you also know the sand is starting to shift under your feet. The desert has a way of remembering things. Even after years back in the palace, the taste of exile still lingers on your tongue. You never forget what it felt like to be cast out, stripped of power, forced to rebuild from nothing. So even now, as you rule from Alexandria with Mark Antony at your side and the kingdom pulsing under your fingertips, you stay alert. You know comfort is a seduction all its own. And nothing invites a knife in the back faster than looking too pleased with yourself. So you keep working. Egypt flourishes under your watch. You're funding temples again, honouring the gods, bringing back festivals that had faded into memory during the chaos of your father's reign. Grain is moving, ships are sailing, and your treasury, finally, is fat with Roman silver. The people are happy, or at least content enough not to revolt. And Antony, your Roman lion, seems fully invested in this eastern kingdom of yours. Some nights you wonder if he's more Egyptian now than Roman. He certainly acts like it. But Octavian is still out there, growing bolder by the minute. He's already begun his PR campaign back in Rome, and spoiler alert, it's not flattering. You're no longer Cleopatra, pharaoh of Egypt, mother of Caesarion, diplomat and queen. No, you're the sorceress now, the foreign harlot, the eastern parasite feeding off a noble Roman general. Antony is her puppet, they say, her plaything. And it's not just idle gossip. Octavian is shaping public opinion like a sculptor working in marble. He frames everything, your titles, your wealth, your children, as threats to Rome's values. And Rome, jittery and overworked, is eating it up. It all builds slowly, then all at once. Antony starts making moves that, on their own, wouldn't raise too many eyebrows. He grants land to his and your children. Real land, Roman territory. He elevates Caesarion, publicly calling him the true son of Caesar, a title that directly challenges Octavian's claim. That might be the biggest mistake of all. Octavian was adopted by Caesar, yes, but that adoption made him heir. Caesarion is Caesar's actual biological child, and that to Roman elites makes him a threat, a very inconvenient one. Meanwhile, back in Alexandria, you hold court like you're writing a myth in real time. You and Antony declare yourselves living gods, you as Isis, he as Dionysus. It's symbolic, of course, ritualistic, spiritual, maybe a little theatrical, but to Roman ears, that's heresy and hubris rolled into one. Octavian uses this to paint Antony as a traitor who's abandoned his Roman identity, swallowed whole by your mysticism and your bed. Even your children aren't spared. He calls them illegitimate monarchs of lands that don't belong to you, and Cleopatra Selene, barely old enough to string together sentences in Greek and Egyptian, is branded a threat to Roman order. That's how desperate he is to control the narrative. He's attacking toddlers. You've always known the war would come. You just hoped it might be a cold one. But Octavian isn't interested in treaties or compromises. He wants everything, total power, and that means eliminating you, Antony, your children, and any trace of Caesarion's claim to Caesar's legacy. The world, it turns out, isn't big enough for two Caesars, and here's where things start to slide. Antony launches a campaign against Armenia to try to bolster his military prestige, and while he has some success, it's not enough to silence the critics in Rome. You host another lavish celebration in Alexandria, the Donations of Alexandria, where Antony officially grants your children territories and royal titles. It's bold, yes, maybe too bold, but it's your way of reminding the world that you're not just a consort. You're an equal, a sovereign, a mother shaping empires. But in Rome, Octavian seizes on this moment like a hawk spotting a dying hare. He storms into the Senate, waving Antony's will, possibly stolen, possibly forged, no one really knows for sure, and claims that Antony plans to move the Roman capital to Alexandria, that he's giving Roman provinces to his children, that he's abandoning Rome entirely for the pleasures of the East. Whether it's true doesn't matter. What matters is that Rome believes it, and just like that, war is declared. Officially, openly, but you're ready. Or at least, as ready as anyone can be when facing down the world's most relentless military machine. You and Antony begin to prepare your forces. Egypt becomes a war state. Armies are raised, ships outfitted, alliances reinforced. The old world is shifting, groaning under the weight of two visions. Rome under Octavian, or Rome reborn through the East, through you. Here's something strange. Despite all the propaganda, Antony never fully loses his Roman support. There are still senators and commanders who believe in him, or at least hate Octavian more. But the tide is turning and you can feel it. Whispers in the halls, eyes that look away too quickly. Even some of Antony's men begin to wonder whether this war is really about Rome, or just about the two of you trying to carve out your own kingdom from the bones of a republic. Still, there's hope. You have Egypt, the richest region in the Mediterranean. You have ships, you have soldiers, you have experience, and you still have Caesarion, growing taller, more like his father every day. You teach him the politics of patience, the mask of confidence, the art of surviving when everything around you starts to burn. You don't know if he'll ever be pharaoh in truth, but you raise him as if he will be. Because if you don't believe it, who will? And maybe you cling to that belief a little too tightly. Maybe deep down you hope this war can still be avoided. That if you and Antony just hold firm long enough, Octavian will break before you do. But he doesn't break, he accelerates. The war drums are echoing now. Not just in Rome, not just in Egypt, but everywhere. The Eastern Mediterranean becomes a chessboard. Armies move, ships converge, allies shift. And in the middle of it all, you're still standing, wrapped in silk and strategy, surrounded by loyalty and doubt, carrying a nation on your shoulders and a legacy in your blood. You've survived exile, civil war, poison, betrayal, motherhood, and more Roman egos than anyone should ever have to face. And now, with the whole world teetering on the edge of empire, you're about to face your biggest test yet. The desert remembers, but so do you. This is it. The wind smells like salt and iron now. War isn't some distant possibility anymore. It's in the air, in every corner of Alexandria, in every quiet glance from a soldier polishing his armor or a priest lighting a prayer candle at dawn. The city doesn't sleep the way it used to. Not with the Roman fleet sailing steadily closer, and certainly not with Octavian breathing down your neck like the ghost of every empire you've ever outsmarted. You know the storm's about to hit. The only question left is how much of your world survives it. But before that, there's one more masterpiece of pageantry to pull off. One final moment to cement your place not just in Egypt's history, but in the imaginations of every person who will ever speak your name. And so, you plan your entrance into the coming battle, not just with ships and soldiers, but with spectacle. Because if you're going down like a goddess. Here's the thing about Cleopatra. You never just show up. You arrive. You make people feel your presence. That's what you do now. As Antony gathers your fleet and prepares the legions, you put on your divine mask once again. Not metaphorically, but literally. You appear in full regalia as Isis incarnate, wearing gold-threaded robes, your headdress shimmering in the torchlight, the sacred Urias cobra poised above your brow. You visit temples. You bless the troops. You hold ceremonies that blend ancient Egyptian ritual with just enough Greek flair to keep both halves of your kingdom enthralled. The people, gods bless them. They believe in you. They always have. You've given them more than taxes and grain. You've given them narrative, meaning, the idea that Egypt is more than a place. It's you. It's your will made visible. They sing your name not just as a queen, but as a protector, the mother of the Nile. And maybe, in some deeper place even you won't admit aloud, you need to believe that too. And then there's Antony. Your equal in some ways, your contrast in others. As you gear up for war like a priestess commander, he drinks more, laughs harder, fights like a man chasing ghosts. He knows this might be his last act. Maybe that's why he throws himself into it with such reckless devotion. He still believes he can win. You let him. You stand beside him at strategy meetings, wearing cool calm while he roars and gestures over maps. Your voice is the quiet counterpoint to his fury. Two halves of one very public, very doomed command. The big plan? Face Octavian's navy head-on. Force a decisive battle at sea. It's risky, especially since Antony's strength was always on land, but it's the only shot you have at keeping him bottled up long enough to turn the tide. So the stage is set at Actium on the western coast of Greece, where your combined Egyptian-Roman fleet faces off against Octavian's leaner, better organised armada. And this is where it all begins to unravel. The battle starts at dawn, under a sky smeared in orange and steel grey. The sea is calm, but the tension on the decks is sharp enough to cut through wood. Your ships are massive, beautifully decorated but bulky. Slow. Octavian's fleet is faster, more agile. You watch from the flagship, dressed in royal armour that gleams like fire under the sun. You're not here to be rescued, you're here to fight. And for a while, it even seems like you might stand a chance, but then something happens. A break. A shift. Maybe it's confusion in Antony's chain of command. Maybe it's betrayal. Some historians think one of his generals defected mid-battle. Others believe the men simply panicked, or that the ships were too slow to manoeuvre in the tight, smoke-choked bay. What's clear is this. At a critical moment, your ships begin to scatter, and you, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt, do the unthinkable. You give the order to retreat. Now, here's the debate. Did you flee in fear? Did you leave Antony behind to save yourself? Or were you following a plan, an emergency maneuver designed to regroup later? The sources are divided, and most of them are Roman, which means they're eager to paint you as the cowardly seductress running from the flames. But there's another possibility. You saw the battle turning, realized it was lost, and made the brutal decision to preserve what forces you could. You sail away, your royal ship disappearing into the smoke. Antony sees you go, and in a moment that's either tragic or foolishly romantic, he follows, abandons the battle entirely and sails after your retreating fleet. That's the moment the war is lost. Back in Alexandria, the mood is heavier now. You've returned to your city, but it's not the same place. The air feels thicker, the palace quieter. Even the waves at the harbour crash a little harder than before. Your people still believe in you, but they're waiting, watching. Their queen has returned, but without victory. Antony spirals. You try to hold him up, try to keep the front of power intact, but he's unravelling. He drinks more, he isolates himself. Sometimes he bursts into a manic rage, other times he just disappears, into the garden, into silence. You manage the kingdom while he drifts between war plans and melancholy. And somewhere in this mess, you start preparing for the next phase, because you know Octavian is coming. You secure your treasure, you hide scrolls, move gold, send envoys to distant allies, Even start negotiating with nearby kingdoms in case you need to flee with Caesarion and the children. You plan escape routes, underground passages, maybe even a fake tomb. You tell no one everything, not even Antony. Because now survival is not just about you, it's about legacy. That's something Octavian never understood. You're not just fighting for power, you're fighting to shape how this ends, how you're remembered. You could lose the war and still win the story. And then, the ships arrive. Octavian lands in Egypt with Roman discipline and ambition wound tight around his spine. No parades, no declarations, just steel and silence and a cold, hard finality. The end is near, but you still have one last performance left. The ships are in the harbour now, Roman flags whip in the wind above rows of precise, silent soldiers. You watch from a high balcony as Octavian's forces move like a slow tide into the edges of Alexandria, careful, deliberate, inevitable. No more rumours, no more waiting. The end has come. But if the city is holding its breath, you are not. You've been breathing smoke and tension for years now, and the fire behind your eyes still hasn't gone out. You were never going to surrender quietly. The palace changes with the presence of war. The halls, once echoing with music and the soft rustle of linen, now hum with whispered orders and the distant clang of soldiers preparing for siege. Servants move like ghosts. You barely see the children. You've hidden them away under heavy guard in a quiet wing of the palace surrounded by those still loyal. Caesarion especially. He's your greatest triumph and your greatest vulnerability, all wrapped into one boy who looks more and more like Caesar with each passing day. And Antony, he's fading, slipping out of reach. The man who once strode into Alexandria with the confidence of a war god now paces like a man haunted by every wrong turn. You try to reach him. Some days he seems like himself again, strategizing, issuing commands, swearing that one good move could still turn it all around. But you both know that move isn't coming. Octavian doesn't make mistakes. He calculates, adjusts, advances. He's a slow, cold knife through everything you've built. Still, you perform. Always. You visit the temples in full regalia. You show yourself to the people, dressed not in mourning but in gold, like a ruler untouched by dread. You keep the city calm, because if you look scared, they'll break. And if they break, the war ends before it truly begins. But in private, the walls are closing in. You hold war councils at night, sometimes with Antony, sometimes without. The remaining generals are quiet, unsure. Even your closest allies, those who have stood with you since the early days, are starting to look inward, considering their futures in a Rome-controlled world. The truth is, your kingdom is an island now, cut off, surrounded. Octavian's blockade is perfect. His army advances slowly, methodically, taking everything around you and leaving only the palace untouched, for now. You begin to make backup plans, secret ones. You've always been a planner, and you know how to play the long game. You arrange for caches of gold and scrolls to be smuggled out. You commission a tomb, not for the public, not yet, but for yourself. A monument of white stone carved with symbols of Isis and Osiris, filled with treasures and illusions, a place designed not just to bury a body, but to make a statement that even in death, you are queen. Antony doesn't know all of this. He's too caught in the unravelling. After Actium, something in him fractured permanently. He clings to pride, but it's thin now, brittle. He tries to hold on to his soldiers, but they begin deserting in waves. Each day you receive news of another general defecting, another fort surrendered without a fight. Alexandria is all that's left, and you can feel even that beginning to slip. Then, one morning, a rumour reaches you. Octavian has taken the outer city. Not the palace, not yet, but he's inside. Antony hears the same rumour, and it breaks him. He believes you've betrayed him, that you've already made a deal with Octavian, that you've saved yourself. You don't even get the chance to deny it before he storms off, his face pale and his voice hoarse with rage and heartbreak. He disappears. You search the palace, the gardens, the barracks, but he's not in any of the usual places, and then word comes from a guard stumbling in with blood on his tunic. Antony has stabbed himself, in the stomach, the old Roman way, only he didn't die, not quickly, not cleanly. You run to him. Forget the silk, forget the goddess mask. You run like a woman, not a queen. When you find him, he's lying in a pool of blood, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. He looks up and sees you, and in that moment, whatever suspicion he felt burns away. He knows he was wrong. He knows you didn't betray him. You kneel in the blood. Hold him. His armor is cold against your skin. He dies in your arms, whispering something only you can hear. And then it's quiet. Not in the city. Alexandria still hums with the low tension of Roman occupation. But in you. A kind of silence settles. You've lost lovers before. You've buried siblings. You've poisoned brothers. But this is different. Antony wasn't just a partner. He was the last tether to the world you had tried to build. And now, he's gone. You don't break. Not where anyone can see it. Instead, you shut the doors of your chamber and begin preparing for what comes next. Octavian sends word. He wants to meet. He's finally ready to enter the palace. You know what this is. It's not negotiation. It's not diplomacy. It's victory. He wants to see you, not as an equal, but as a defeated queen. A final souvenir to parade through Rome, like your sister Arsinoe was dragged years ago in Caesar's triumph. But you're not a trophy. You meet him, yes. You dress carefully. Not too regal, not too humble. You look like a woman who could still command a throne, but who won't weep if it's taken. Octavian is young, cold-eyed, controlled. The kind of man who doesn't make emotional decisions, but who still enjoys watching his enemies unravel. You try to charm him. You offer him gold, knowledge, even access to the children, on your terms. But his eyes never soften. He doesn't want your alliance. He wants your erasure. And worst of all, he wants Caesarion, your son, your link to Caesar, the last true heir to Rome and Egypt combined. Octavian knows Caesarion's existence undermines his claim. As long as the boy lives, his throne isn't secure. He tells you, not directly but through implication, that your son will not survive this, that he's already sent riders to intercept him. That's when you make your decision. The palace becomes a tomb. Quietly, without public spectacle, you begin final preparations. You visit the mausoleum you built, stock it with riches, with scrolls, with symbols of your reign. You dress one last time, not in silk but in linen, in white. You eat a quiet meal. You sit with your handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, who've been with you since your youth, and you speak of simpler times. The palace is still, as if it knows what's coming. You write a letter to Octavian. It's vague, polite. But between the lines, it's a warning. A woman who chooses her ending cannot be paraded. Then, in a room filled with soft candlelight and the smell of oil and lotus, you hold out your arm. There are many theories, even now. Was it a snake? A hidden asp smuggled in a fig basket? A poisoned hairpin? A tincture in wine? No one agrees. The stories twist and shimmer like heat above the desert sand. But the result is the same. Your breath slows. Your eyes close. Charmian fixes your crown, even as she begins to collapse. A fine thing, she says, her last words before falling beside you. A fine thing, this, to die as becomes the daughter of kings. And just like that, the last pharaoh of Egypt slips out of history and into legend. The palace is quieter than it's ever been. Not the quiet of peace, but the hollow, echoing stillness that follows something vast and final. You're gone now. Cleopatra, pharaoh of Egypt, is no longer walking those marble halls, no longer watching the sunrise from her balcony, or writing letters in careful Greek to monarchs who feared you and scholars who revered you. The last breath you took was wrapped in ritual, and the very stones of the palace seemed to hold it, echoing your absence like a memory caught in the architecture. But of course, you're not done. Not really. You just moved into the part of the story where no one agrees what happens next. Because when Octavian finally enters the palace in full triumph, the woman he came to parade through Rome is no longer available for display. You've beaten him in the only way left, by denying him the finale he wrote for you. He finds your body lying in the mausoleum you built yourself, crowned and still, your handmaidens beside you like loyal stars fallen around a queen. It's not blood or war or surrender. It's art, a final act of control. The message is unmistakable. You don't own this ending. Octavian is furious, or maybe he's impressed. Hard to say with a man like him. He hides it well, no matter what he's feeling. He orders your body embalmed with the care due a monarch, though whether that's respect or political theatre is anyone's guess. He's Roman, after all. Appearances matter. Let the people say he honoured the queen, even as he wiped her dynasty off the map. What comes next is brutal in its efficiency. Caesarion, your son, your living legacy, is captured while trying to flee to India or Ethiopia. or maybe just away. Where exactly he was headed is still debated. He's caught before he can cross the Red Sea. And Octavian, despite whatever sympathies he may pretend to feel, gives the order. Too many Caesars is bad for Rome, he says. And just like that, the last true heir of Julius Caesar is quietly removed from the world. No grand trial, no public spectacle, just a line crossed out of history's book. Your other children, the ones you had with Antony, Cleopatra Selene, Alexander Helios, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, are spared, but only because they're politically useful. Octavian takes them to Rome, parades them through the streets like prizes. The twins are forced to walk behind the chariot dressed in chains, while a model of Egypt's Nile floats behind them, complete with fake crocodiles and tiny papyrus boats. It's meant to humiliate, to show Rome what it's conquered. But the people watching that triumph see something else too, the shadow of a queen they never really understood. Cleopatra Selene eventually becomes a queen in her own right. Octavian, now calling himself Augustus, marries her off to King Juba II of Mauritania. A political move, yes, but not a cruel one. The girl grows up smart, poised and shrewd like her mother. She carries your name into a new kingdom, and with it, some echo of your pride. If anything of you survived the fall of Alexandria, it's in her, your daughter, ruling on a different shore under a different name but still part of the same story. Back in Egypt, things change fast. Octavian annexes the kingdom as a Roman province. Gone is the idea of the divine pharaoh. Gone are the independent temples and the gilded ceremonies where gods walked beside mortals. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which began with one of Alexander the Great's generals 300 years ago, ends with your carefully planned death. The golden age of Egypt, at least in the sense of Egyptian rule, is over, and Alexandria, your beloved city, it survives. The library, though damaged by war and neglect, still flickers with knowledge. The scholars remain, though fewer now. The streets still bustle with trade, the harbour still brims with ships. But the heartbeat has changed. Rome is here now. Governors in togas walk the same marble floors you once ruled from. Latin creeps in beside Greek and Coptic. The temples still hold services, but now under Roman supervision. The gods haven't left, but they speak more quietly. Your tomb, if we're being honest, is lost. People have looked for centuries, combing the coastlines, diving into the harbour, digging through crumbling ruins in Taposiris Magna and other likely spots. No one has found it. Yet. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe it's hidden beneath the silt of the Nile, or buried under a modern city block. Or maybe, in the most Cleopatra twist of all, it was never meant to be found. Maybe you didn't want your bones picked over by archaeologists and treasure hunters. Maybe you just wanted to disappear into myth. And oh, you do. You don't fade into history. You explode into it. The Romans try to control your image, make you the cautionary tale, the dangerous woman who bewitched great men and brought empires to their knees. But the world refuses to accept just that version. Instead, your story blossoms, changes, grows. Poets write you into verses dripping with longing and power. Artists paint you reclining on velvet couches, snakes coiled around your wrists. Centuries later, Shakespeare gives you lines like, "Give me my robe, put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me." It's tragic, yes, but also defiant. That's the version that sticks. The queen who knew how to end her own story, and how to make sure people never stopped telling it. Then come the scholars. They debate everything. Were you truly beautiful, or just charismatic beyond reason? Did you actually speak 9 languages fluently, or was that ancient PR? Did you love Caesar and Antony, or did you simply see them as means to an end? The answers vary, but one thing stays constant. No one can stop talking about you. For someone buried without a trace, you have astonishing staying power. And then, centuries later, come the treasure hunters. The Victorians, obsessed with mummies and sphinxes, start ransacking tombs and museums, desperate to find you, or at least a piece of you. Your face ends up on everything from cigarette cards to opera posters. They get so fixated on your death scene that some even keep snakes in cages and speculate wildly about asp venom and exotic rituals. But none of them find your body, and so the mystery lingers. Here's a quirky little footnote to all this. There's actually a theory that you never died at all. Some say you faked the whole thing, vanished with Caesarean into the desert, started a new life in secret. Total fringe stuff, obviously. but it persists, because you're that kind of story, too big, too rich, too perfectly tragic to fit inside a tomb. So what are you now? A queen? A villain? A feminist icon? A warning? A myth? Yes. All of it. And somewhere, perhaps beneath waves or sand, or simply inside the minds of those who still whisper your name at night, you remain. Always watching, always strategizing, forever Cleopatra. You're not here anymore, not in the breathing, walking, ruling sense, but the world hasn't stopped writing you. In fact, it's only just begun. Your kingdom may be gone, your lineage wiped from official scrolls, but Cleopatra, the idea, the woman, the myth, has legs. Long ones, apparently, because she walks right through history's front doors and takes up permanent residence. And what's wild is how much people argue over you, as if understanding Cleopatra is the key to understanding everything about politics, gender, empire, and power. At first, of course, the Romans get to write the first draft. That's the price of losing. You die, they win, they control the narrative. Octavian, now going by Augustus because modesty isn't really his thing, makes sure that your memory is trimmed, polished, and conveniently shaped to serve his brand. To his version of history, you were the woman who corrupted Rome's finest general, a cunning seductress who used foreign magic to twist men's minds, and most importantly, a cautionary tale. The Eastern Queen, the exotic danger. Not a ruler to be admired, but a warning to every Roman matron about what happens when a woman steps too far out of line. And yet, they couldn't stop talking about you. Even the writers who tried to reduce you into some perfume-soaked distraction ended up memorializing your intellect. Plutarch, writing decades after your death, admits you weren't the most beautiful woman in the world. But when you spoke, no one cared. It wasn't your face, he says. It was your presence. The way your voice could slip into a room ahead of your footsteps and stay there after you'd gone. That's the kind of power they don't teach in rhetoric school. And it's not just Romans. Later historians, poets, and artists latch onto your story like it's catnip. Medieval scholars debate your soul's fate. Did you die a pagan queen or a tragic victim, possibly worthy of Christian pity? Islamic scholars preserve your scientific achievements, describing you as a philosopher queen who dabbled in alchemy, medicine, and mathematics. In some accounts, you're less Aphrodite and more Athena, wise, curious, deeply in control of your own legacy. But here's where it gets weird. Around the Renaissance, European thinkers start obsessing over Egypt all over again. Not modern Egypt, mind you. They want your Egypt. Mystical, glamorous, and crawling with meaning. The Renaissance is obsessed with the classical world, and Cleopatra fits right into their mould of obsession. Painters drape you across fainting couches with pearls dangling from your ears, and servants waiting with baskets of snakes. You're not just a historical figure anymore, you're a mood! And by the 19th century, it's full-blown Cleopatra fever. The Victorians are absolutely hooked. They're obsessed with Egypt in general, digging up tombs, robbing mummies, stuffing museums with anything that looks remotely ancient. You're the jewel of their fantasy. Plays, operas, and paintings all try to capture your death scene. Always glamorous, always tragic, always full of eyeliner. Even though your actual face has never been found, they imagine you as impossibly beautiful, dressed in shimmering gauze, dramatically clutching a serpent like it's a fashion accessory. They're less interested in your policies, your political brilliance, or your multilingual fluency. They want a drama queen, and you deliver. There's this one painting, The Death of Cleopatra by Jean-André Rixen, that shows you reclining on a velvet couch, robes slipping off your shoulder, asp curled dramatically near your breast, and a look of dreamy peace on your face. Historically accurate? Absolutely not. But emotionally? Somehow yes. Because by now, you're more than facts. You're a vibe, a symbol, a mirror that reflects whatever the world wants to see in powerful women. Let's pause there for a moment, because this part matters. You don't control this version of the story. You're gone. But in your absence, the world fills in the blanks, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with fear, always with fascination, and that says more about them than it does about you. Here's a little quirky fact to chew on. In the 1800s, some amateur Egyptologists insisted that Cleopatra invented the modern-day mirror. Not kidding, it's absolutely not true, but it spread, because it fit the image people had of you. Vanity, beauty, self-awareness wrapped in mystery. There's something deeply ironic about people trying to understand you by staring into a reflection that never stops shifting. Even your name becomes shorthand. Cleopatra becomes a synonym for seductive power. If a woman has influence and men are scared of her, she's a Cleopatra. Doesn't matter if she's a CEO or an opera singer or someone in a love triangle. That label gets slapped on, and with it comes the assumption that beauty was your main weapon. It's almost funny in a tragic sort of way how history simplifies complicated women into cartoon villains or helpless victims. You somehow get to be both. But even as they flatten you into stereotypes, they can't help but admire you. Your face ends up on coins, postage stamps, perfume bottles. You're invoked by suffragettes and denounced by conservative columnists. Hollywood eventually gets a hold of your story, but we'll save that wild ride for later. For now, let's just linger on this moment. This strange liminal space where you're both myth and memory. And here's the debate that still rages in scholarly circles. Who were you really? Was the real Cleopatra the sharp, educated ruler with a brilliant grasp of economics and international politics? Or the passionate lover who risked everything for the men she chose? Were you a goddess walking among mortals, or just a woman doing her best to survive in a world that never gave women a fair shot? Historians have dug through every scrap of parchment, every fragment of papyrus, every Roman rant and Greek poem, trying to find the truth. And maybe that's the final power you hold over them. You made yourself so fascinating, so layered, so contradictory that they'll never pin you down completely. So even in death, you remain an enigma. You're not buried in one of those grand pyramids, and your name isn't carved into a surviving obelisk. But that doesn't matter. Your tomb was never meant to be just stone and shadow. It's this endless story, told and retold, reshaped by every generation that needs to believe in something more. A queen, a strategist, a mother, a goddess, a scandal, a symbol. You've become all of it, and you're only getting started. History doesn't leave you alone, not even for a century. You'd think after orchestrating one of the most dramatic exits in the ancient world, people would let you rest. But no. Cleopatra is the ghost that refuses to fade. You haunt scholars, artists, actors, politicians, and anyone with an opinion about women in power. And nothing fuels this fire more than one very messy turning point: the murder of Julius Caesar. Let's rewind to that sticky Roman afternoon in 44 BCE, where your fate twists in ways no prophecy could have truly prepared for. You're in Egypt, ruling as queen beside your young son Caesarion. His father, of course, is Caesar himself. You've just returned from a triumphant, if complicated, visit to Rome, where you stirred curiosity and fury in equal measure. Some saw you as Caesar's eastern jewel. Others saw you as the foreign threat breathing too close to Rome's sacred institutions. Either way, you had his attention, and maybe too much of it. Then comes the Ides of March. Caesar walks into the theatre of Pompey and doesn't walk back out. Assassinated by his own senators. 23 stab wounds. They call it patriotism. You call it a coup. In Egypt, the news hits like a blow to the chest. Your plans, your alliances, your entire position, it all shifts in the time it takes for a messenger to cross the sea. And for once, you don't know exactly what comes next. Not yet. Because Caesar's death doesn't just leave a political vacuum, it unleashes a civil war of godlike proportions. Rome collapses in on itself, and you, standing far away on the warm shores of Alexandria, are caught in the gravity of it. Here's where it gets messy. Caesar didn't leave a will naming Caesarion as his heir. Instead, he posthumously adopts his great-nephew, Gaius Octavius, soon to be known as Octavian. That stings, not just politically, but personally. Caesarion is his actual son, your son, a child with the blood of Rome and Egypt in his veins. But Rome doesn't care about biology, it cares about convenience. And Octavian is in Rome, hungry, ambitious, and ready to claim what he believes is his. At first, you play it cool. You don't leap into the chaos, you wait. Watch. Because you're not going to make the mistake of backing the wrong Roman horse. Not again. Not so soon. But what's boiling in you is rage. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that writes letters in 5 languages and sends quiet messengers into the shadows. The kind that takes long walks through palace gardens, imagining a world where your son sits on a throne made of gold and marble. And here's where the debate begins, still echoing in modern academic journals. What did Cleopatra actually want? Did you want to rule Rome through Caesar? Did you believe in a merged empire, half Egyptian sun, half Roman discipline? Or were you always simply focused on preserving Egypt, playing the Romans against each other as tools to ensure your land and your family survived? There's no simple answer, but it's clear you never wanted to be Roman. You wanted to be equal to Rome, and that's what made them panic. The civil war unfolds with all the elegance of a collapsing temple. Octavian versus Antony, with Lepidus awkwardly clinging to relevance in the background. And while these Roman men are tearing each other to pieces, you finally decide to act. You reach out, not to Octavian, who's colder than a marble statue, but to Antony, Caesar's old friend and current power player in the East. It's a political play, absolutely, but also maybe the first move in a genuine connection. You invite Antony to Tarsus, and, as we've covered, you don't exactly stroll in with a polite handshake. You arrive on a golden barge dressed as Aphrodite herself, wrapped in perfume, silk and confidence. It's not seduction, it's a statement. I'm not here to beg, I'm here to dazzle, and you succeed. Antony is smitten, or at least intrigued enough to follow you back to Egypt. What begins as an alliance morphs quickly into something deeper. Not just romance, not just strategy, but a mutual reshaping of destiny. Antony sees in you a partner, someone who matches his grandeur, and you see in him an anchor, someone who can balance the Roman chaos while you continue to mould Egypt into the kingdom it deserves to be. You spend the next several years building, not just love nests as Roman poets would have people believe, but power, real power. You stabilize Egypt, restore festivals, commission new buildings, you raise your children, first Caesarion, then twins by Antony, and eventually another son. You craft a dynasty in the making, one that fuses Roman might with Egyptian tradition. And the Romans, they lose their minds. Octavian starts spreading stories. You're corrupting Antony, making him drink, dressing him like a fool, pulling him away from his Roman duties, and you're dangerous. A queen who won't bow, a woman who uses words like weapons and wears divinity like perfume. He paints you not as a ruler, but as a witch. It's hilarious, really, when you think about how often powerful women get tagged as sorceresses the moment they make men uncomfortable. Here's a strange little historical footnote. Some Roman sources claim you had books of magic, that you cast spells over Antony, that your palace was filled with alchemists and astrologers whispering secrets into your ear. Of course, that says more about Roman paranoia than about you. Yes, you consulted priests and astronomers. You were a pharaoh. It was your job to channel the divine. But magic? No. You didn't need it. You had charm, knowledge, timing, and an uncanny ability to read people before they opened their mouths. But despite your efforts, the weight of politics pulls harder. Antony, once adored by Rome, begins to falter. His campaign against Parthia is a disaster. His authority in the West slips. And that's when he makes a fateful mistake. He officially recognizes Caesarion as Caesar's son and rightful heir. This isn't just a personal gesture. It's an open challenge to Octavian's claim to power, and that, will not go unanswered. You see the writing on the wall. Octavian won't just come for Antony. He'll come for you, for Egypt, for everything you've built. So you start preparing, not just for war, but for memory. You know how history works. You know who gets to write it. So you begin planting your own story, through ceremonies, through coins, through inscriptions. You want the world to remember your version, not the one Rome will invent when the smoke clears. And deep down, maybe you know you won't win the war, but you're still determined to win the legacy. Mark Antony doesn't make a quiet entrance. That's never been his style. When he returns to Alexandria after the muddled, messy defeat in Parthia, he's not limping in shame. He's throwing himself into feast speeches and increasingly theatrical performances of Roman-Egyptian divinity. He calls himself Dionysus Reborn, god of wine and rebirth. And you? Naturally, you're Isis, mother of kings, the goddess who bends fate. The two of you step deeper into the roles you've created, equal parts political armour and spiritual theatre. But somewhere between the golden goblets and the torchlit ceremonies, the line between ritual and reality begins to blur. The public still loves it. Your people see a queen who glows with divine authority, and a consort who dances through Alexandria like a god returned. The city becomes an open-air stage. Banquets spill into streets. Priests chant blessings that echo from temple to temple. The elite drink imported wines. Musicians play day and night. The city pulses with grandeur. But underneath all of it, The pressure's building. Because while you play goddess and Antony plays king, Octavian plays chess, and he's moving fast. From Rome, he watches, waits, and then strikes. Not with armies yet, but with something more corrosive: reputation. He turns public opinion into a weapon sharper than any sword. The Roman Senate hears tales of you and Antony lounging on gold couches, giving away Roman lands to children born of sin, drunk on luxury while Rome tightens its belt. And worst of all, that Antony's forgotten who he is, forgotten what he is. A Roman, a citizen, not a pharaoh, not a consort. Octavian hammers that message into every speech, every letter, every whisper in the forum. He doesn't need truth, just consistency. He paints you as the manipulator, the foreign queen with eyes full of deceit and poison hidden behind every kiss. You're not a mother, not a scholar, not a ruler, just a woman who slithered her way into Caesar's bed and Antony's brain. The Romans eat it up, not because they know you, but because they don't. And what people don't understand, they fear. But Alexandria remains your sanctuary for now, and in that sanctuary you and Antony make a decision that will send your names ricocheting through every future history book, the donations of Alexandria. It's your masterstroke of political theatre. You gather the citizens in the grand gymnasium, thousands of them. The colonnades are lined with banners, the torches are lit, the people wait, buzzing. And then you and Antony step out, dressed not as mortals but as gods. He as Dionysus Osiris, you as Isis Aphrodite. Your children stand beside you in miniature royal garb, solemn as miniature statues. In front of the crowd you announce the future of the world. Antony grants kingdoms to each of your children, Armenia and Media to Alexander Helios, Libya and Cyrenaica to Ptolemy Philadelphus, and Cleopatra, Selene gets Crete and Cyrenaica. But the real lightning bolt is this: your declaration that Caesarion is the true son of Julius Caesar, the legitimate heir not just to Egypt but to Rome. It's a breathtaking move, daring, iconic, and let's be honest, suicidal. Octavian now has the ammunition he needs. Up to this point he's attacked you both as threats to Roman dignity. But now he frames you as traitors. Antony's actions aren't just foolish, they're treason. He's handing Roman territories to his children with a foreign queen. Worse, he's suggesting that Caesar's heir isn't Octavian, but your son. That undercuts the entire foundation of Octavian's power. It's not just about succession anymore, it's about survival. Back in Rome, the Senate gasps, then gags, then gives Octavian full support to declare war, not on Antony directly, but on you. You, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. The framing is critical. By casting the war as a conflict with a foreign ruler, Octavian bypasses legal constraints and stirs Roman patriotism. You're now the enemy of the Republic, the sorceress, the Eastern tyrant. It's personal, it's gendered, and it's political poison, poured slowly and deliberately. And what do? You prepare. You and Antony begin assembling your forces, rallying allies from the eastern provinces. Egypt's gold flows into the war effort. Fleets are built, horses trained, spies deployed. But there's something else happening too, something quieter. You begin planning for loss. You're no fool. You've read the signs. This isn't the same kind of war you fought before. This one feels heavier, slower. There's a kind of dread wrapped in every decision. You start to protect your legacy, not just your throne. You commission copies of sacred texts. You arrange for Caesarion's education to continue in secret. You speak more frequently with temple priests, discussing the rituals of burial, of memory, of divinity. You begin quietly to contemplate your final act. Historians still debate it, whether you were truly confident in victory at this point, or whether you were simply building the illusion of confidence. Some argue you were an optimist until the very end. Others think you knew all along that Actium would break you. The truth, as usual, probably lives in the middle. You were hopeful, but prepared. And then the date approaches. September 2nd, 31 BCE, the Battle of Actium. You stand aboard your flagship, its massive sails dyed Tyrian purple, its hull gleaming with bronze and gold. Your fleet is massive, impressive, but it's also slow, heavy. Octavian's fleet, smaller but faster, waits outside the bay like a predator. You stand beside Antony, eyes on the horizon. There are no chants today, no parades, only wind and strategy, and the quiet thump of your heart echoing beneath your ribs. The battle is a blur. Fire, smoke, confusion, signals lost in chaos, ships breaking apart in waves. And in the middle of it, you see the impossible unfolding. Your fleet is losing. Not from weakness, but from disarray. The formation collapses. And then comes the choice. Your flagship turns, not away from the battle, not toward Antony, but out, toward open sea. A calculated move, maybe one last strategy, maybe pure survival. And Antony, seeing you go, abandons the fight to follow. Rome predictably calls it cowardice, but Alexandria knows better. You weren't running, you were preserving. You lived to fight another day. And even though Actium is a loss, a crushing public loss, you're not finished yet. Not by a long shot. After Actium, the silence in Alexandria is different. Not the calm before the storm. No, that's long gone. But the sharp, eerie quiet after the roof collapses and before the dust settles. You return not as the victorious queen, not this time, but as the ruler of a kingdom cracked down the middle. The fleet is in tatters. The soldiers are disillusioned. The city still loves you, yes, but now there's fear in their eyes when they look at the horizon. Because out there, somewhere just beyond the sea, Octavian is coming. And this time, it's not politics, it's conquest. But even with your losses bleeding out in plain view, you don't crumble. You never do. You walk the palace halls with your chin up, your robes perfectly draped, your eyes alert. Because losing one battle doesn't mean losing the war, not yet. You start working immediately, spinning the disaster at Actium into a story of delay, not defeat. You say the retreat was tactical. You reassure your allies, promising reinforcements and negotiations. You lean harder into your identity as Isis, the Divine Mother, eternal and unfailing. Because if the people believe you're still a goddess, then maybe, just maybe, the gods haven't abandoned Egypt. Behind the scenes, though, you're scrambling. Your letters grow more desperate, your meetings longer, quieter. You summon philosophers, priests, even astrologers, asking about omens, star alignments, any hint of what's to come. And when the answers don't comfort you, you start preparing for all possible outcomes. You don't just prepare for escape, you prepare for legacy. One of your boldest moves happens in Dendera, an ancient temple complex dedicated to Hathor. It's not a battlefield, not a palace, not even a political centre, but it becomes a canvas. You commission new carvings, monumental and vivid. There, etched into the stone, you present yourself not merely as queen, not even as Isis reborn, but as the rightful ruler of the entire world. In these depictions, Caesarion is shown at your side, fully divine, fully crowned, fully Roman. In this story there's no Octavian, no defeat, just you, your son, and an unbroken empire. It's a last grasp at shaping the narrative, and honestly it's genius, because even if the armies fall, stone endures. Those carvings don't bleed, they don't retreat, they just sit there, thousands of years later still whispering the story you wanted told. Of course all this pageantry can't hide what's coming. Supplies run low, soldiers desert, even Antony, your once godlike general, is fading. After Actium, something in him shatters. He still plays the role, he still dons armour, holds court, talks of counterattacks, but he's haunted. The laughter is forced now, the charm dulled by exhaustion and wine. He spends more time in the gardens, staring into the sky as if waiting for an answer to fall out of it. You try to keep him together. You remind him of your children, of Caesarion, of the legacy you can still protect. But it's clear, Antony is no longer the man who wooed Rome with his thunder and bravado. He's the man who lost everything, and he knows it. Rome isn't just winning, it's reshaping the future, and Antony has become a relic of a war that's already being written in past tense. Still, you keep pushing. You send envoys to Parthia, hoping they'll come to your aid. You try to rally the remaining provinces under Antony's control. You even make contact with Octavian's camp, trying to open a channel, offering gold, access, anything. Not out of desperation, but out of strategy. If Octavian wants Egypt's wealth, maybe he'll spare the crown. Or maybe he'll take Caesarion as his ward instead of a rival. You're not done negotiating, not until the very end. And then he lands. Octavian arrives in Egypt like a surgeon, cutting clean and fast. He doesn't storm the gates. He doesn't sack the city. He doesn't need to. He already owns it in spirit. The people don't resist. Not out of betrayal, but out of exhaustion. They've seen too much war, heard too many promises. Alexandria folds itself around the Roman general, not with joy, but with numb surrender. Antony tries to mount a defence. He rallies a final group of soldiers. They march half-heartedly toward the incoming tide, but it's a gesture, not a battle. When Antony hears that his forces have surrendered without a fight, he believes the end has come, not just militarily, but personally. He's told that you have taken your life, that you chose to die rather than be captured. And in a moment of grief and guilt, Antony falls on his sword. But the blade misses the mark. He doesn't die instantly. The wound is deep, the blood loss massive, but he lingers. And then comes the twist. You're still alive. When the truth reaches you, it's already too late. You rush to him, past crumbling soldiers, through corridors now occupied by shadows of what used to be. You find him bleeding, pale, broken. You cradle him as his breath slows, and in that moment, for the first time in years, you're not Cleopatra, the goddess, the ruler, the symbol. You're just a woman watching someone you once loved disappear by inches. He dies in your arms. A Roman ending for a Roman man. But you still have work to do. Octavian enters the palace soon after, and he doesn't find the fierce warrior queen or the seductive enchantress he expected. He finds you, calm and precise, still wearing the mask of royalty. You speak to him as an equal. You offer him the empire's riches. You talk of alliances. You hint at mercy. But he doesn't respond with warmth. He looks at you like a puzzle he doesn't want to solve. His orders are already written. And Caesarion? You try to save him. You send him east or south, depending on who you believe. You give him escorts, money, maps, prayers. You send him out like a final gamble. You know Octavian can't tolerate his existence. Caesarion is living proof that Augustus isn't Caesar's only heir, that there was another path, another Rome, one ruled not by fear, but by fusion. Egypt and Rome, east and west, joined not by conquest, but by blood. But Octavian's reach is long. Caesarion is intercepted, and with his death, the line ends. Not just your family, but Egypt's divine monarchy. 300 years of Ptolemaic rule snuffed out with one blade, somewhere on a dusty road far from home. And you write one final letter. You eat one final meal. You slip into the linen robes you wore in ceremony, in ritual, in prayer, and you vanish. Not just from the palace, not just from the world, but from certainty. Because after that day, no one knows exactly what happened. Some say it was a snake, an asp hidden in a fig basket. Others say poison on a comb. Others still say it was staged, that you died by dagger or by pact with your handmaidens. But one thing's clear, you chose the ending. You wrote the last line, and Octavian, for all his legions, never got to parade you through Rome in chains. You remained a queen until your final breath. Alexandria doesn't mourn loudly after your death. It grieves in silence with shuttered windows and hushed conversations, like the city itself is afraid that even grief might draw Roman attention. The air hangs heavy, not just with the heat of late summer, but with something deeper. Resignation. You were the last breath of something ancient, sacred, and utterly singular. With your passing, Egypt isn't just conquered, it's transformed, cracked open, and slowly hollowed out from within. Octavian, now officially Augustus, moves through the palace like a man unpacking a new home. He doesn't rage or destroy. He catalogues, assesses, claims. He wants Egypt intact, its wealth undisturbed, its machinery of power humming beneath Roman oversight. A province, not a battlefield. But you complicate that. Because even dead, you refuse to stay quiet. Your tomb becomes a point of fascination. Rumours spread that it's filled with unimaginable treasure, that it contains secret scrolls, that you were buried with poisons and curses to protect your final rest. But the location is unknown. Your burial site, like your legacy, slips into the fog of unconfirmed stories. Octavian orders it sealed wherever it is. He doesn't want people worshipping you, but even that act, especially that act, adds to the mystery. In the years that follow, you become something more than a historical figure. You become a memory dressed in myth, not just because of how you lived, but because of how you ended. The queen who died on her terms. The woman who defied Rome's need for spectacle. That's the power move that echoes through time, and that's when the stories begin to evolve. The first are subtle, whispers in the Roman streets, that you were not merely a queen, but a sorceress, that you enchanted Caesar and bewitched Antony, that your knowledge of poisons was unrivaled, that you could kill with a kiss or resurrect the dead with words in languages no one else understood. Most of it, of course, is nonsense, but it grows, flourishes. Rome turns you into a figure of fear and fascination, a symbol of the East's dangerous allure. They make you responsible for the fall of their own heroes, not because it's true, but because it's useful. And yet, despite the slander, your memory refuses to die. In the centuries after Rome swallows Egypt, your name is kept alive by those who quietly admire you. Philosophers, scribes, and the occasional daring woman who dares to dream bigger than she's allowed. In Christian traditions, you're reduced, seen as a sinner, a temptress, a cautionary tale. But even there you live. You're mentioned in sermons, warned against in moral lessons. Your shadow stretches into the medieval world, dark and glamorous. Then the Renaissance arrives. Suddenly, the West rediscovers antiquity, and with it, you. You're dusted off and studied. Scholars dig through old Roman texts, Greek papyri, anything with your name scratched into it. Artists paint you with alabaster skin draped in pearls, poised between luxury and death. They don't get the details right. How could they? But they get the feeling. That strange, heavy mix of brilliance and tragedy, seduction and sovereignty. One painting shows you moments before the asp strikes, gazing upward as if calling out to a god who may or may not answer. Another shows you reclining, half undressed, barely 20, with the eyes that suggest she's read more books than her male critics ever will. You're reborn again and again, never the same woman twice. And scholars? They can't stop circling you. Some fixate on your lovers, reducing you to the men in your orbit, as if the empires you held together with bare hands were just a side hobby. Others dig into your economics, your use of coinage, your alliance building. You become the subject of lectures, dissertations, wildly inaccurate biographies. Your intellect is praised, then downplayed, then rediscovered. One modern historian calls you a master of optics. Another says you are a mirror onto which each generation projects its anxieties. Someone else writes an entire thesis just on your makeup routine. The range is dizzying, and through it all your legend mutates. Sometimes you're the martyr queen, noble and doomed. Sometimes you're the femme fatale, dripping in venom and eyeliner. Sometimes you're a feminist icon centuries before the word existed, and sometimes you're just a puzzle, unsolved, unsolvable, eternal. The theatre world adores you, of course. Shakespeare, bless him, turns your life into poetry. In Antony and Cleopatra, he gives you fire and fury, but also softness. He lets you rage. He lets you mourn. He lets you choose death with dignity. That one line, "I am fire and air. My other elements I give to baser life," becomes a kind of spell, a mantra passed down to every actress who steps into your sandals. And in opera, you are drama incarnate. Your voice becomes high and tremulous, full of longing and rage, echoing across grand stages with orchestras crashing beneath your grief. Composers can't resist your ending. Beautiful, fatal, unforgettable. You even start popping up in the sciences. Alchemists in the Middle Ages claim you knew the secret of transmutation. One text, the Cleopatra treatise, supposedly outlines her experiments with metallurgy and the nature of life itself. Was it really you? Doubtful. But the name sticks, because even science wants a piece of your magic. And here's the oddest twist of all. Despite all the statues and stories, we still don't know exactly what you looked like. Not really. Coins show a strong profile, a hooked nose, a sharp jawline. Some think the image was stylized to project power. Others argue it's accurate. Roman noses weren't exactly dainty either. Your beauty, it turns out, is one of history's most heated debates. Was Cleopatra stunning? Not in the conventional Venus on a shell way, maybe. But beauty isn't just symmetry and skin. It's presence. Command. That pause in a room when someone steps into it and everyone else forgets what they were saying. That was yours. And even the Romans who hated you admitted as much. You're not remembered because you were beautiful. You're remembered because you were compelling. Because you mattered. And because you never let anyone else write your story without a fight. Even now, people still search for your tomb. They dig in the sand. They dive into the harbour. They read ancient maps like treasure hunters hoping to find the edge of the myth. But maybe they're looking in the wrong place. because Cleopatra doesn't rest in stone. She lives in the stories, she always has. Let's talk about Octavian for a moment. Augustus, if you prefer the PR name he carved into eternity. After your death, he becomes Rome's first emperor, the man who turns a shaky republic into a gleaming autocracy dressed up in senatorial robes. He rules with careful control, calculated mercy, and just enough theatrical humility to make people forget how many heads he stepped over to get there. But even with all his reforms, all his marble monuments and triumphal parades, there's something he never quite escapes. You. You haunt him. Not openly. He's too disciplined for that. But beneath the laurels and the statues, in the quiet corners of his reign, Cleopatra lingers. The woman who almost outplayed him, who nearly redefined Rome's future, who died with more defiance in her last breath than most senators managed in a lifetime. For all the power he accumulates, he'll never be able to erase the fact that, at the height of his rise, his greatest threat wasn't a general or a consul, it was a queen. He tries to erase you, of course. He bans public mourning in Alexandria. He executes anyone seen as too loyal to your memory. He makes sure your children are raised Roman, cleansed, rebranded. Cleopatra Selene is married off to Jubasusius, a North African king who's loyal to Rome, gifted with a decent library and a palace far enough from the Tiber to pose no threat. She thrives, actually. Smart like you. Regal like you. She even brings a bit of Alexandrian style to Mauritania, building temples, patronizing scholars, planting Egyptian palms along the African coast. In her you continue, but under layers of Roman silk and sand. As for Caesarion, your son with Caesar, the boy you tried to save, he becomes a whisper. Augustus has him killed, quietly, without spectacle. He's too dangerous, even as a child, too symbolic. The idea that Julius Caesar had a real son, born of a queen, threatens everything Augustus built his empire on. The boy had no throne, no army, just his blood. And that was enough to get him erased. And yet, his existence keeps cropping up. Some claim Caesarion escaped, that the body buried wasn't his, that he lived in hiding under a new name. Fringe stories, yes, but they stick around. Because no one wants the story to end where history says it does. That's the thing about you and your children. People keep trying to resurrect you, even when they claim they've buried you. Meanwhile, Alexandria continues to live in the wake of your absence. The city changes under Roman rule, more orderly, less mystical. The temples remain open, but they're no longer living centres of power. The scholars still read, write, argue, but now under Roman eyes. The Nile flows as it always has, but something in the air feels thinner. The divine has left the palace, and still, people talk about you. Quietly, carefully. Some say you were a goddess in human form. Others say you were a witch who died before she could cast her final spell. Both are wrong. You weren't divine or demonic. You were strategic, curious, calculated, human. That's what made you dangerous and unforgettable. Now here's something interesting. Hundreds of years later, in Roman art and literature, Antony starts to get a little redemption. He's remembered as a tragic hero, a man undone by love. Not by you specifically, but by the idea of you. Rome loves a good tragedy when it's no longer politically threatening, and in these softened retellings, you're often included, not as the villain, but as the fatal muse. Still blamed, yes, but also romanticised, as if your biggest crime was making powerful men feel too much. Fast forward a few more centuries and suddenly you're everywhere again. The Renaissance explodes with rediscovered texts, and your name is back in the mouths of Europe's elite. You're painted, performed, reimagined. Your death becomes a subject of obsession. Artists love the idea of the beautiful woman who chooses death over humiliation. They paint it again and again, you lying in silken robes, an asp at your breast, a serene look on your face as if you've just whispered something witty and eternal before slipping away. But none of these images are you. Not really. They're masks, filters, visions created by people who need Cleopatra to be something else, something digestible. Because the real you, the multilingual, politically ruthless, financially savvy queen who survived multiple civil wars and ruled one of the richest kingdoms in the ancient world, that version is too complex, too threatening, too modern, and that's the thread that runs through every version of your story, the need to simplify, to make you one thing, a seductress, a saint, a monster, a martyr, a goddess, Anything but what you actually were. All of it at once. One scholar, writing in the 21st century, calls you the original brand. You understood image before media even existed. You used costume, language, ritual, and spectacle like tools. You weren't just Cleopatra. You were always performing Cleopatra, and in doing so, you made yourself unforgettable. Take your languages, for example. Historians believe you spoke at least 7, maybe 9. You were the only Ptolemaic ruler to speak Egyptian fluently. That wasn't just a cultural flex, it was politics. You knew that words were power, that understanding a people meant you could control them without lifting a sword. Then there's your coinage. Most ancient rulers appeared on coins as idealized deities. You showed your real features, a strong nose, a firm jaw. You wanted people to see you as ruler, not ornament. Your coin face matched Antony's almost exactly, same style, same sharp profile, because you knew a visual echo had power. Two sides of the same coin, literally. And yet, in modern media, we keep circling back to the makeup, the eyeliner, the lipstick, as if your face, not your mind, was the empire. It's kind of ironic. The woman who mastered every layer of identity, Greek and Egyptian, pharaoh and mother, warrior and lover, is now remembered mostly for her mascara. But here's the twist. Even that superficial fascination keeps you alive. Every new movie, every stage play, every Halloween costume, it means your name's still in the air, still whispering through our imagination. You've lasted longer than almost any ruler of your time, not because of how you looked, not even because of how you died, but because you refused to be easy. You're a question mark etched into history's skin, and the answers keep changing, generation after generation. Let's shift our gaze to the sea now, the wind, the sails, the sound of oars slapping the dark waves. Because long before the dust of Alexandria's street settles, long before your name is carved into legend, there's a moment where everything hangs by a thread, and that moment happens on the open water. The Battle of Actium. Not your final breath, not your last hour in the palace, but the instant your fate slides from the grip of your hands and into the cold, calculated world of Roman supremacy. Let's go back there, not to the myth, but to the mess. It's September 2nd, 31 BCE. The Ionian Sea is glassy, thick with tension, as your fleet sits in formation near the narrow strait off the coast of Greece. Your ships, Egyptian and Eastern, massive and ornate, are lined like chess pieces, their decks gleaming with bronze, their sails catching the morning light. Antony commands the centre. You, on your flagship, ride in the rear flank. The smell of pitch and seaweed hangs in the air, and underneath it all something sour, fear, maybe, or pride turned brittle. Octavian's fleet, smaller but faster, waits in the open water. His commander, Agrippa, is no poet, no philosopher, just a brutally efficient naval tactician, the kind of man who doesn't care how beautiful a ship is, only how fast it can turn before it rams, the kind of man who builds victory with rope, sweat and wind. He's not there for glory, he's there to win. The plan, yours and Antony's, is to fight your way through the bottleneck, break the blockade and escape to regroup in Egypt. It's a risky plan. You both know that. Your ships are heavier, slower, but they're also stronger, taller. If they can get close enough to engage, they might have a chance. So you wait, watching the Roman sails approach like teeth. And then the horns sound. The sea erupts into fire and thunder. Ships lurch forward, arrows fly, the crack of wood on wood, the screams of men falling into the water, the thick plumes of smoke. It all happens at once, all colour and chaos. You watch from your deck, eyes narrowed, hands gripping the rail, calculating the angles. Your ships struggle to turn in the narrow waters. Octavian's smaller vessels dart in and out, slashing with rams, setting sails alight, harassing the larger ships like wasps stinging an elephant. There's debate, always debate, about what happens next. Some say your ships start to burn, others say the line breaks, but what everyone agrees on is this. At a critical moment your flagship turns, south, away from the fight, toward the open sea. Was it planned? A desperate retreat? Or something more strategic? You don't tell anyone, not even Antony. But the decision to sail out of the battlefield becomes one of the most hotly debated acts in ancient history. Some call it betrayal, others call it genius. But either way, once you turn, the course of your life, and Antony's, changes forever. He sees your ship disappearing into the horizon and abandons his command to follow you. Just like that, the commander-in-chief leaves his fleet mid-battle, and without him, the line collapses, morale shatters, the remaining ships surrender or sink. Octavian doesn't just win, he dominates. Back in Alexandria days later, you hear the full scope of what's happened. Not just a lost battle, but the destruction of your naval power, the unravelling of Antony's reputation, the cracking of everything you'd been building for years. You're not shocked, not exactly, but the weight of it sits in your chest like a stone. Still, you don't break. Instead, you pivot. Fast. You begin reinforcing Alexandria's defences. You stockpile food. You move gold. You prepare diplomatic channels. You even send emissaries to Octavian, offering to abdicate, to surrender, even to stand trial if he'll let Caesarion live. He doesn't answer. That silence is its own message. Meanwhile, Antony dissolves. Not physically, not yet. But something in him folds inward. He holds on to a skeleton crew of loyalists, drags out daily routines, trains, parades, but the spark is gone. He drinks more. You catch him staring off into space too often. He's not planning anymore, he's waiting. And you? You can't afford to wait. So while he's lost in memory, you take charge. You dismiss his broken plans. You run the treasury. You move the children into hiding. You meet with the priests and prepare the sacred rites for what could be the end of your reign. You even begin designing your tomb in earnest, not out of melodrama but out of necessity. Because you know Octavian isn't coming for negotiations. He's coming to end a dynasty. Here's where the legend tightens. You become myth in motion. Even as your world shrinks to a palace under siege, you walk through it with command. You're not begging. You're not pleading. You're ruling. Every gesture, every word is measured. You still appear in public wearing your crown. You still host ceremonial dinners. You still speak of the gods, of destiny, of Egypt's resilience. And maybe it's all theatre, but that theatre keeps your people from collapsing, and that's your gift. The performance of power that feels like the real thing. The line between illusion and command so blurred that it doesn't matter anymore. You're not pretending to be a queen. You are one, even if the army is gone and the treasury is dwindling. And all the while you wait for news of Caesarion. You've sent him away, cloaked in anonymity, watched over by loyal guards. He's your last real hope. The boy who could still carry your blood into the future. If he survives, maybe your story doesn't end in dust and myth. Maybe it just changes shape. But time moves, and so does Octavian. He marches south with methodical precision. He doesn't burn or sack. He doesn't need to. Alexandria opens its gates without resistance, and when he walks into your city, it's not with fanfare, but with finality. You're waiting for him, not on a throne, not at a banquet, but behind a locked door in the quiet shadows of your tomb. And soon, the last act begins. Alexandria belongs to Octavian now. The streets don't erupt with cheers or violence, they just go still, like a once proud animal finally collapsing under exhaustion. No one rushes to stop him. No rebels leap from alleyways. The people have seen too much. First Caesar, then Antony. Now this soft-spoken Roman with ice behind the eyes and destiny clenched in his jaw. His soldiers march through your marble streets with calm brutality. Not pillaging, not boasting, just occupying. You feel it immediately. The final weight settling over your kingdom. This isn't a siege. It's a takeover already written in stone. From the palace you watch it unfold. You stand at the window of your private chamber, the view that once brought you comfort now tightened with dread. The harbour, so often filled with bright sails and laughter, looks like a military chessboard. Roman ships stacked like teeth. Alexandria's soul, its bustle, its brilliance, is hushed under sandals and standards. But you're not dead yet, and there's still a part of you, even now, that can't stop calculating. Octavian sends word. He wants a meeting. Alone. Not to negotiate. He's beyond that. He wants to see you. The woman who outwitted his uncle, who held Antony's loyalty, who ruled one of the richest kingdoms on earth like a deity in human form. He wants to meet the myth he's about to erase. You take your time. You don't greet him in rags or silk. You don't lean into tragedy or majesty. You dress deliberately, in the understated linen of a high priestess. You keep your crown off, but wear your cobra, uraeus, coiled on your brow. You present yourself as what you are, the last pharaoh of Egypt, meeting not an emperor, but an ending. He arrives flanked by guards, but he steps forward alone. His face is smooth, unreadable. He's still so young, too young to have caused so much death, you think. His eyes flicker around the chamber, taking in the gold accents, the incense, the bare walls that hint at treasures already moved or hidden. Then he looks at you, and something shifts. Not admiration, not fear, just calculation. You talk, briefly. You offer him what's left. Treasure, loyalty, even the palace. But he's not here for those things. He's here to eliminate complications. And that means one name, Caesarion. Your son. The boy who carries the blood of Julius Caesar. You mention him, lightly, carefully. You say he's far away, that he poses no threat. You say he's just a child. Octavian doesn't reply, but the look in his eyes says enough. You know what's coming. And the second he leaves, something in you breaks. Not loudly, but quietly. Like a thread snapping inside a loom. Not because of fear, but because this was always the risk. The moment Caesarion was born, this outcome became possible, maybe inevitable. You summon your handmaidens, Iris, Charmian, loyal to the end. They've seen you rise from girl to queen to goddess and back again. They know what you're going to ask and they don't protest. They help you make the arrangements. Your mausoleum is prepared, the offerings laid, the final meals ordered. The door is sealed from the inside. Golden scrolls are packed around the tomb. It is not a burial chamber. It is a statement. You write one last letter to Octavian. It's short, formal, deliberately vague. You request to be buried beside Antony. You ask for mercy for your attendants. You say nothing of Caesarion, because by now you know there is no mercy for your son. You're not writing to appeal to Octavian's humanity. You're writing to remind him he's not the only one who understands performance. Then the room dims. The air is still, warm, scented with lotus, wine, and the faint sharpness of fear. There are many theories, as always. Some say a serpent was smuggled in with a basket of figs. Others say you used a poisoned comb, or a sharp golden hairpin soaked in venom. Still others insist Octavian murdered you and staged it to look like suicide. The truth, as always, curls like smoke. What we know is this. When Octavian's guards finally break into your tomb, they find you lying peacefully, dressed in white, your arms crossed over your chest. Charmian is still alive, barely. She adjusts your crown one last time before collapsing beside you. When asked what's happened, she says, "A fine thing it is to die as becomes the daughter of kings." The message couldn't be clearer. This was not surrender, this was sovereignty. And suddenly Octavian's perfect victory feels less perfect. He doesn't get the finale he wanted. No paraded queen, no chained goddess in the streets of Rome. Just absence, a hole in the story he wanted to write. And because of that, he has to fill the gap himself, with propaganda, with new gods, with the myth of Rome's triumph. But the ghost of what could have been haunts every speech, every marble column he erects in his name. You stole the ending, and the irony, that defiance makes your story eternal. Octavian goes on to rule for decades. He ushers in peace, wealth, and architectural wonders. He becomes the model emperor, the one all others mimic. But even he knows that somewhere far away, in a sealed tomb shrouded in mystery, lies the woman who refused to bow. And your people? They remember, in whispers, in prayers, in the way your face, even in death, shows up in temple art. Half divine, half real. Isis and Cleopatra, merged into one. In Alexandria the temple bells still ring, the Nile still floods, the people still light candles in quiet corners, and your name still tastes like rebellion. There's a strange thing that happens after you die. You become bigger. Not in the way of monuments or marble busts, not immediately, but in the way people talk about you, argue about you, reshape you to fit whatever narrative their moment in history needs. You're no longer just Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, Queen of Egypt, last of the Ptolemies. You're Cleopatra, all sharp angles and myth, impossible beauty and bottomless cunning, forever tied to poison and love and the fall of kings. You're not a person anymore, you're a story. And stories live longer than dynasties. Still, let's not forget the human part. Let's go back for a moment to the mausoleum, to that sealed room beneath Alexandria where you chose to end it on your own terms. Imagine the quiet inside after the door closes, the torchlight flickering off polished alabaster walls, the air heavy with incense and lotus, the rustle of linen as your handmaidens move carefully around you. They've prepared the oils, the charms, the final rituals. You sit on a low couch, not trembling, not praying, just thinking. Maybe you think of Caesar, how his voice used to rumble low when he was planning something, how he would half smile when you corrected his Greek. Maybe you think of Antony, that ridiculous charismatic hurricane of a man who made you laugh even when the world was ending. Maybe you think of Caesarion, wherever he is, your son, your legacy, your unfinished sentence. Maybe you think of your father, Ptolemy XII, and how it all started with his desperate return to the throne, carried by Roman swords and bribes. Of your sisters, your brothers, the dinners where you had to smile while wondering which goblet was poisoned. Of Alexandria, your Alexandria, with its ivory towers and blue-tiled baths and scholars arguing under sun-dappled porticos. You don't get to say goodbye to all of it. But you do get to choose how the curtain falls. There's something ancient, almost poetic, in the way you craft your death. You don't just slip away. You build a performance, a temple, a monument to defiance. You don't leave your enemies a spectacle. They wanted a captive queen dragged through Rome, weeping and beaten. Instead, you give them a silence so loud it echoes for millennia. And Octavian? He doesn't know what to do with it? Sure, he spins the story. Of course he does. He says you were cowardly, or hysterical, or obsessed with love. He makes sure Rome understands this wasn't power, it was madness. But his voice cracks a little when he tells it. Because deep down, even he knows the truth. You didn't fall. You stepped out. He buries you with Antony just like you asked. Or so they say. If that tomb still exists, no one's ever confirmed it. Archaeologists have searched for centuries, beneath the sea, beneath ruined temples, beneath layers of dust and centuries of silence. Nothing. No bones, no crown, no sign of the last pharaoh of Egypt or her Roman consort, which only makes the legend more tantalizing. The queen who vanished, leaving only questions behind. The Romans take your kingdom, turn it into a province. They install governors, demand taxes, and mine the land for grain and gold. The temples stay open for a while. Rome's good at pretending not to disrupt things too quickly. But eventually the rituals fade, the gods go quiet, the priests die out. The last echoes of your reign disappear into bureaucracy. And Alexandria? It survives. Sort of. The lighthouse still stands for a time. The library, though badly damaged, limps on. For a few generations the city continues as a cultural hub. But the golden age is over. The light that once burned so brightly, that fusion of Greek intellect and Egyptian soul, dims under Roman order. But the world can't quite forget you. In fact, it gets creative. Within a century of your death, Roman poets begin painting you not as a queen, but as a seductress, the ultimate femme fatale. Virgil, in his Aeneid, describes a Cleopatra who dresses for war like a goddess of doom, her hair crowned in snakes, her heart steeled by madness. It's all theatre, no mention of your education, your political savvy, your command of languages or economies, just danger wrapped in perfume. The image sticks. Centuries later, this version of you becomes dominant, the queen who seduced two great Roman men and destroyed them both. Never mind that both of them made their own catastrophes long before you appeared. You're the convenient scapegoat, the foreign woman, the one with too much charm, too much intellect, too much power, and yet that same image becomes the seed of your immortality. The Renaissance artists adore you. So do the Baroque painters, the opera composers, the Enlightenment philosophers. You become a canvas onto which everyone projects their own ideas of female power. Sometimes you're a cautionary tale. Ambition in a woman is dangerous, see how she fell. Sometimes you're a romantic heroine, doomed by love, noble to the end. Sometimes you're a villain, a viper. Sometimes you're a goddess. Rarely are you allowed to be all of them at once. Here's a curious side note. In some medieval Islamic writings, you're not a seductress at all. You're a philosopher, a queen alchemist, a woman of wisdom and magic, associated with lost knowledge and ancient power. You show up in Arabic texts about medicine and metaphysics. It's a completely different lens. Not flattering in the romantic sense, but deeply respectful. Which version is the truth? The real you? It's like trying to catch wind in your hands. Even now, historians argue, was Cleopatra beautiful? Was she manipulative? Was she the victim of Roman smear campaigns or the architect of her own downfall? The answer probably is yes to all of it. and none of it. You were not a metaphor, you were a monarch, a woman trying to hold an empire together while Rome unzipped the world. The thing is, your story isn't just history, it's a mirror, and every era stares into it and sees something different. Fear, desire, curiosity, shame. The patriarchy sees danger, feminism sees power, Hollywood sees eyeliner. But somewhere beneath the paint and poetry, there's still you. The young girl with venom in her bloodline and scrolls in her lap. The teen queen navigating exile and alliance. The woman who dared to speak to generals like equals. The mother hiding her son beneath the desert stars. The ruler who went down not on her knees but with a plan. And that version, the real you, the hard-to-pin-down one, she's still out there, in tombs waiting to be found, in stories waiting to be retold, in eyes that stare at the sea, wondering where the ships are going. Let's settle once and for all the part of your story that refuses to die, the cause of death. Not the why, which we've covered. Politics, legacy, dignity, control, but the how. That one moment, sealed behind palace walls, where you turned history into theatre, because for over 2,000 years people can't seem to agree on the exact method of your final act. It's become its own obsession, this question of how Cleopatra died. Not because they doubt that she died, but because the drama of the ending refuses to stay still. The most famous version, you already know, the asp. A venomous Egyptian cobra, coiled in a basket of figs, smuggled past the guards and pressed to your pale skin. A bite to the arm, or maybe the breast. Everyone from Roman poets to Renaissance painters has an opinion about the location. The venom slips in quietly, they say. You don't scream, you simply slip away, dignified, regal, the same way you lived, silent and poised to the last breath. It's a powerful image, isn't it? The queen, the snake, the soft shadows of the tomb. That idea has coiled itself so tightly around your story that even people who know nothing about ancient history know that scene. It's Shakespeare, it's opera, it's a million oil paintings with artfully draped linen and perfectly placed fangs. It's cinematic, it's also possibly a complete lie. Here's the thing about the asp theory. Cobras are not subtle creatures. Their venom is neurotoxic, yes, but a cobra bite doesn't kill you gently. It's painful, violent. In some cases, it takes hours. You seize, your vision blurs, your lungs begin to forget how to breathe. It's not exactly graceful, and handling one is no small task. Imagine trying to wrangle a live cobra into a palace tomb, keeping it calm long enough for it to perform its lethal duty. Even with handlers, and yes, the palace likely had animal keepers, it's a gamble. Some ancient sources claim you hid the snake in a fig basket. Others say it was stored in a water jar. Some even suggest that it wasn't one snake, but two, because after all, both Iris and Charmian die with you, and one snake wouldn't have done the job quickly or efficiently enough. Then there's the version where the asp gets too enthusiastic and bites a guard on the way out, who then dies unexpectedly. A warning, perhaps? A side effect? Who knows? But as far as clean, controlled poisonings go, this one raises eyebrows. Which brings us to theory number 2, the poisoned comb. Or maybe a hairpin, or a flask of venom tucked into the folds of your robe. This idea has its fans, historians who point out that you were trained in pharmacology, raised among scholars, surrounded by the best minds in chemistry and medicine. You knew your toxins. You weren't some amateur dabbling in snake charming. If anyone could concoct a lethal, elegant poison that mimicked sleep, it would be you. The idea here is less theatrical and more clinical. You applied the poison yourself, perhaps through a comb soaked in toxins and used on your scalp, or maybe a pin dipped in venom pressed to your skin. It would have been faster, more predictable, and more private. You wouldn't need handlers or wild animals, just knowledge, timing, and the steady hand of someone who understood both chemistry and consequence. This theory has gained traction in recent decades, mostly because it feels more you. Less pageantry, more precision, but it's not as dramatic, and people love drama. Which is why theory number 3 refuses to go away. Octavian killed you. Oh yes. The conspiracy theory lives on. The idea that you didn't take your life at all, but were executed quietly, efficiently, by Roman command. Maybe you changed your mind. Maybe you weren't fast enough. Maybe you struck a bargain that Octavian refused to honour. The theory suggests that once Octavian had what he wanted, your treasure, your city, your children, he ordered the job finished. No trial, no parade, just silence. There's no hard proof. But some historians note the convenient timing, that Octavian arrived too late, that your body was already prepared, buried before the public could see it, that his account of your death was vague and second-hand, that the version of your suicide came primarily from his sources, conveniently shaping the narrative to serve Roman dignity. Because here's the awkward truth. A murdered queen looks like a tyrant's victim. A self-sacrificed queen? That's tragic. Noble. Greek tragedy material. Much easier to sell. But let's get real. You were a master of image, of performance, of controlling how the story unfolded, so maybe the how doesn't matter as much as the why. You took back control in your final act. Whether it was a snake, a pin, or a cup of something bitter and ancient, the important thing is this. It was your decision. You didn't give Rome your humiliation. You gave them a question mark. And history? It hates loose ends. That's why people keep going back to it. Dissecting autopsy notes that don't exist. Chasing temple graffiti that might not reference you at all. Poring over ancient descriptions of your death that conflict and contradict and confuse. Because they want an answer. They want to know. As if solving the mystery might finally allow them to close the book on you. But you knew better. You knew that sometimes the power is in the not knowing. A snake or a poison, a dagger or a daggerless hand, a tomb filled with incense or a shadowy betrayal. You vanish into myth because you understood one thing the Romans didn't. A perfect ending isn't always about truth. It's about impact, and you nailed it. Even now the scene still plays in the world's imagination. The torchlight, the draped linen, the final breath of a queen who refused to be dragged through the streets, the silence afterward, the power in choosing how the story ends. Even if no one knows exactly what happened inside that sealed room, you disappeared, and in doing so, you became eternal. Death doesn't stop you. It might have paused your heartbeat, but it didn't slow your momentum. In fact, the moment your body is laid to rest, wherever that secret tomb may be, you begin a second life. One made of myths, of retellings, of twisted truths and imagined conversations. Rome may have won the war, but it never really got rid of you. Because for every denarius Octavian minted with his smug profile on it, there was someone, somewhere, still whispering about Cleopatra. The queen, the enchantress, the woman who dared to defy an empire. They buried your body, but they couldn't bury your reputation. In fact, they used it. Let's start with Rome. Augustus, doesn't want anyone remembering you as a ruler with actual skills. That would be awkward. It might make people question what he had to do to beat you. So instead, he lays down the narrative like a well-pressed toga. Cleopatra was foreign, seductive, manipulative. She ruined Antony. She lured Caesar into madness. She threatened the order of the Republic with her perfumes and her silk and her serpents. It's not that Rome fell in love with the East, no, it's that Rome was ensnared. By you. This is a clever move on Augustus's part. By reducing you to a symbol of dangerous femininity, he elevates himself without having to say anything new about his policies. And by painting your relationship with Antony as a tragic misadventure of passion, he turns his military conquest into a moral rescue. He doesn't defeat Antony, he saves him from you, which is rich, considering you probably had more strategy in your pinky ring than Octavian ever did behind a Senate podium.
Still, the smear campaign works, for a while. Poets like Horace and Propertius toe the party line. They describe you as wild, unhinged, filled with Eastern decadence and bizarre rituals. One moment you're summoning serpents in moonlit gardens, the next you're gulping down poisons with a smile. It's all very theatrical, very politically useful, and also deeply unfair. They never write about your multilingual diplomacy, your economic reforms, your management of famine and trade. Apparently it's just hard to rhyme taxation policies with doom. But here's where things get tricky for Augustus and every Roman historian who tried to pin you down. People love a villain, especially when she's beautiful and mysterious and smart. You were never forgotten, not even close. Your image kept slipping through the cracks of empire, surviving in whispers, in paintings, in speculative biographies that blurred facts with fantasy. You became an obsession. Fast forward a few hundred years, and your story reappears in Byzantine chronicles, Persian texts, even the Quranic commentaries, where you're reimagined as a powerful sorceress queen. And that's where things start to bend even further. No one can agree on who you were anymore. Are you a scholar or a siren? A queen or a cult figure? Were you cursed? Were you divine? Was it actually a snake? Even better, the Renaissance comes along and suddenly you're fashionable. Italian nobles commission paintings of your death, always with perfect eyeliner and tasteful nudity, because artistic license is a slippery slope. They frame you lying on a velvet chaise, serpent discreetly doing its thing, as if death were just another item on your royal to-do list. You look calm, smug, like someone who knows the afterlife is just another throne room. These images travel across Europe, each one more stylized than the last. Some depict you as soft and tragic, others as intense and cruel, but always, always unforgettable. Then, in the 16th and 17th centuries, a certain playwright named Shakespeare gets his hands on your story, and things go supernova. Antony and Cleopatra becomes a theatrical staple, and this time, you're given depth, passion, wit. You're not just a seductress, you're a woman with fire in her veins and strategy behind her smile. Shakespeare doesn't pretend you're innocent, but he gives you dignity. Lines like, "Give me my robe, put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me." That's you taking death in your hands like a scepter. That's poetry built from power. Ironically, the same Roman voices that once tried to destroy your reputation helped immortalize you. Without them writing about you, biased and brutal though they were, we might not even remember your name. They tried to turn you into a cautionary tale, but all they did was guarantee your spotlight, and the world kept watching. You became a character in French operas, German novels, British paintings. Napoleon scholars dug through Egyptian tombs, hoping to find some trace of you. In the 19th century, when Europe became obsessed with ancient Egypt, your name was plastered across plays, perfume bottles, and silk fans. Victorian women copied your hairstyle. Cleopatra-themed masquerade balls were the rage in Paris. You were luxury, you were danger, you were brand, and yet the facts, still murky. The truth about you, your policies, your decisions, your letters, all of it became harder to extract from the centuries of costume and metaphor. Scholars bickered over your ethnicity, your beauty, your intelligence. One group insisted you were brilliant, the other claimed you coasted on seduction. Every statue, every coin, every bust was scrutinized like a confession. And you just kept shifting in the shadows. Because no matter how many books they wrote or portraits they painted, no one could pin down the real Cleopatra. They had to guess, imagine, fill in the blanks, and you knew they would, you made sure of it. The Romans thought they'd buried a threat. What they buried was a spark, one that kept relighting itself, generation after generation, culture after culture. You became a mirror, and everyone who looked into it saw what they feared or desired or hoped for in a woman who refused to behave. And then, Hollywood finds you. By the time the silver screen flickers to life in the early 20th century, you've already been reborn in oils and operas 1,000 times over. But film? That's a new stage, bigger, bolder, capable of making your legend move. Suddenly, Cleopatra doesn't just sit on a throne or whisper on a canvas. She walks, talks, pouts, seduces, slaps, dies, over and over. And the thing is, Hollywood falls for you instantly. It doesn't matter that your real history is complex, contradictory, nuanced. None of that fits into a neat 90-minute runtime. So they simplify you. But not by making you less. No, never that. They just make you more, in the most dramatic, sequined, slow-motion way possible. The first major screen Cleopatra appears in 1917, played by Theda Bara. This is silent film Cleopatra. No voice, but a lot of eyeliner and intensity. She's all mystery and curves and gauzy veils, lounging on tiger skins, staring down men like they're appetizers. The production was massive, scandalous even. People were outraged at how sultry she was. But that's the point, isn't it? Hollywood doesn't need facts, it needs feelings. And you, of all people, know how to deliver a feeling. By the time we get to the 1934 version, with Claudette Colbert in the role, you're pure glamour. The sets are ridiculous. Pyramids and columns stacked like a fever dream. Glittering costumes that defy gravity. Colbert's Cleopatra is flirty, clever, perfectly sarcastic. When she enters Rome, she does it reclining in a giant sphinx pulled by slaves, with one eyebrow raised like she owns the whole Mediterranean. Which, to be fair, you basically did. But it's 1963 that blows the entire mythos into a cinematic supernova, Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra. That film is a spectacle in the truest sense of the word. 4 hours of golden headdresses, slow speeches, and the kind of eyeliner that inspired entire cosmetic empires. The production nearly bankrupts 20th Century Fox. Off-screen, the scandal between Taylor and Richard Burton, your latest reincarnated Antony, becomes tabloid history in its own right. The lines between fiction and real life blur. Cleopatra isn't just a movie. She's a force of nature. Again. And let's be clear, no version of you is historically accurate. But none of them need to be, because each one is a reflection of its time. In the 1910s, you're exotic danger. In the 30s, a witty seductress with style for days. In the 60s, you're power and passion wrapped in jewels. And now, you're whoever we need you to be next. Which brings us to the modern era, where your image keeps shifting. Today, people argue over what you looked like, fiercely. Skin tone, facial features, ancestry, it's all debated, not because it changes your story, but because it reveals something about the people asking the questions. Was Cleopatra white? Was she black? Was she Greek-looking? Egyptian-looking? Who gets to claim her? That's the thing, isn't it? Everyone wants a piece of you. You've become a symbol of so many things. Power, beauty, independence, intelligence, downfall, resilience. Feminists call you an icon. Nationalists argue about your bloodline. Classicists dissect your political alliances. Conspiracy theorists say you never died. And the fashion industry? Oh, they absolutely adore you. Let's be real. No other historical figure has influenced as many Halloween costumes, runway looks, music videos, and perfume ads. You are high glam, high drama, high impact. The winged eyeliner alone has transcended time and geography. Ancient Egyptians used malachite and coal to protect against the sun and ward off spirits. You turned it into a trademark. Every time someone wings their eyeliner just a little too far, they're channeling you, whether they know it or not. But beneath the sequins and script rewrites, the story still matters. Your real story. The one that doesn't get screen time because it's too complicated, too real. The Cleopatra who negotiated grain prices, who spoke multiple languages, who maneuvered between empires, who led a fleet, who lost a war, who took her life. That Cleopatra doesn't wear a gold bikini. She wears responsibility, and modern historians are starting to catch on. They're rewriting the textbooks, peeling back the layers, re-examining the propaganda. Cleopatra, they say now, was one of the most capable rulers of her age. She didn't seduce to gain power. She had power, and seduction was a tool, not the whole strategy. She kept Egypt afloat for over 2 decades in a world full of collapsing kingdoms. That's not luck. That's leadership. You've become a case study in the way powerful women are remembered, or, more often, misremembered. Your name is taught in classrooms, but the facts are treated like seasoning, optional. The same goes for other ancient women too. Hatshepsut, Boudica, Zenobia. They all get glamorized, villainized, or flattened to fit whatever story works best. But you get magnified. Even your enemies can't stop bringing you up. Augustus, made you central to his origin story. Roman poets spent decades writing about how you ruined their heroes. And now, every time your name trends or your face appears on a new book cover or movie poster, it's proof. You won. Not the battle, not the war, but the narrative. You outlived them all. You turned your death into a doorway, a starting point. You knew that memory was just another kind of rule, and you built yours like a dynasty. Not from stone, but from story. and you're still telling it. The strange thing is, the further we get from your time, the more obsessed we become with the idea of finding you. Not just metaphorically, you've been found in thousands of poems, plays, paintings, and perfumes, but physically, your tomb, your body, your final resting place. The archaeological world has been chasing you like a ghost for centuries, shovel in one hand, hope in the other, convinced that somewhere under the dust and salt and time, Cleopatra is still waiting to be uncovered. It makes sense. You're the missing piece in a story that refuses to end. You died in a palace, or a mausoleum, or a secret chamber somewhere in or near Alexandria. Ancient texts tell us you were buried with Antony, in a tomb you commissioned yourself, likely filled with gold, scrolls, maybe even the crown you wore in your final hours. But no one's ever found it, not definitively. And oh, how we've tried. Modern Egyptologists, divers, dreamers, they've scoured every inch of Alexandria, both above and below sea level. And yes, much of the ancient city now sleeps beneath the Mediterranean, lost to earthquakes and tsunamis over the centuries. Streets that once echoed with the footsteps of philosophers are now coral gardens. The palaces, submerged. The libraries, gone. But the hope remains that somewhere, intact or partially preserved, is the final chamber of the last pharaoh of Egypt. One of the most promising leads came from a temple complex called Taposiris Magna, about 30 miles west of Alexandria. It's not flashy, it's not grand, it's half crumbled and half buried in sand. But it's a place steeped in mystery. Dedicated to Osiris, husband of Isis, the very goddess you modeled yourself after, it carries a kind of poetic symmetry. And some archaeologists believe that if you wanted to die as Isis reborn, you might have chosen to be buried in a temple that evoked that legend. Excavations there have been dramatic. Human remains, coins with your face, a bust that might resemble you, ceremonial rooms, underground tunnels, a tomb sealed so long ago no one could say what was inside without risking its collapse. Every clue sends headlines into orbit. Cleopatra's tomb found? The question mark always there, hovering like a breath held too long. But so far, no confirmed discovery, no body, no crown, just possibilities. And that's the magic, isn't it? You're not just a historical figure, you're a quest. People feel drawn to find you not because they need closure, but because they want to be part of the myth, to brush against the divine, to say, I was there when the queen came back. It's not just Egyptologists. Artists, filmmakers, tourists, treasure hunters, everyone wants in. There's something deeply human about the urge to reclaim what was lost. And in your case, what was lost was an entire world. A world where women could rule as gods, where East and West met not just in war, but in philosophy, in poetry, in silk-draped strategy sessions that would make modern diplomats sweat. You weren't just a queen, you were a crossroads. And your tomb, if it's ever found, might be the final link. But here's a quiet truth you probably would have appreciated. The longer we don't find your resting place, the more powerful the legend becomes. Because what's more iconic? A tomb behind velvet ropes, cataloged and climate-controlled? Or the image of a queen who slipped out of history's fingers, laughing quietly in the shadows of every temple, every wave, every whispered myth? Let's not forget, this was your specialty. Mystery as currency, performance as politics. You were raised in the house of the Ptolemies, a dynasty so tangled with incest, assassination, and drama that it made HBO look tame. You survived multiple siblings trying to kill you. You charmed two of the most powerful men in Roman history. You ruled a kingdom in economic collapse and turned it into a power broker. And at the very end, when everyone expected you to fall on your knees, you vanished behind a locked door and turned your death into a living question. You knew what you were doing. So if your tomb never appears, if your bones stay hidden beneath centuries of salt and stone, maybe that's not a failure of archaeology. Maybe it's the final twist of your script. Let them look. Let them guess. Let them project their fantasies onto every sarcophagus and every faded coin, with your profile stamped in worn silver. Because in doing so, they keep you alive. And speaking of coins, yours are still around. Thousands of them. Drachmas, tetradrachms, tiny metal testaments to your reign. On some, your nose is long, your chin firm. On others, your hair is tied up in a regal bun, sharp and stately. The Romans mocked your looks, said you weren't beautiful, as if that mattered more than the fact you spoke 9 languages and controlled an empire. But those coins? They weren't made for Rome. They were made for Egypt, for the people you ruled. They saw a queen, not a caricature. And the best part? Those coins are still being found. In deserts, in shipwrecks, in private collections passed down through centuries. Every time one resurfaces, someone holds a piece of your world. A world that's supposed to be long gone, but refuses to stay buried. Much like you. So the next time someone asks, will Cleopatra's tomb ever be found? Maybe the real answer is, it doesn't need to be. Because you're not in one place, you're everywhere. In glass cases and golden rings, in libraries and lullabies, in dreams and documentaries and debates over whether a snakebite or poison ended your life, in teenage girls who walk like they're wearing a crown, and in women who know that ruling doesn't always require a throne. You're not lost, you're just waiting. So let's talk about the legacy, the real one, not the Hollywood fantasy or the marble bust polished by centuries of wishful thinking. What did you leave behind, Cleopatra? Not the tomb, not even the treasure, though, let's be honest, some of that is probably still stashed under a forgotten temple or rotting in a Roman villa's basement. No, I mean the things that truly matter, the echoes that ripple forward every time someone says your name without even realizing they're speaking power into the air. Your most immediate legacy, of course, was felt in Egypt. After your death, the Ptolemaic dynasty was gone. Rome absorbed Egypt like it had so many other regions, turning your rich, independent kingdom into its personal breadbasket. Your palaces became administrative offices. Your priests were eventually stripped of power. The temples remained for a time, but the magic bled out of them slowly, like ink in water. By the 1st century CE, what you ruled as a sovereign queen had become just another Roman province, a grain supplier, a trophy of conquest. And yet, even under Roman rule, even as emperors came and went, the Egyptian people kept whispering your name, not as a traitor, not even as a tragedy, but as a kind of last flame. You were the final monarch who still carried the old gods, the rituals, the language of the Nile in her voice. The Egyptians had suffered through centuries of foreign rule, Persians, Greeks, now Romans. But you spoke their tongue. You honored their deities. You understood that power was sacred, not just political. That mattered. That still matters. Because while Rome tried to make you a cautionary tale, Egypt remembered you differently. Over time, though, the memory began to stretch and bend. You became Isis reborn in some stories, a mystical figure in others. Legends sprang up, tales of you sailing into the afterlife, or escaping death entirely to live in disguise. A few wild stories claimed you transformed into a goddess and still watched over the Nile. You were no longer just a person, you were a symbol, a star in Egypt's long, complicated sky. Your children, scattered to the winds by politics and Roman paranoia, carried slivers of your legacy too. Cleopatra Selene, your daughter with Antony, became Queen of Mauritania alongside Juba II. She ruled with intellect and elegance, introducing Egyptian architecture, astronomical knowledge, and coinage designs that clearly mirrored her mother's. She built libraries, sponsored the arts. She made her little corner of Africa glow with Alexandrian energy. But even she couldn't escape Rome's grip entirely. Her children disappeared from records, likely extinguished by dynastic politics. Your son, Caesarion, the one you fought to protect, was killed by Octavian. No one knows where he's buried. Another vanishing. Another story cut short before it had a chance to bloom. But he too became a symbol in time, Rome's fear of royal blood that didn't run through its own veins. The living proof that you had loved and ruled and left something behind. And as the centuries spun forward, people kept reshaping you. The early Christian era wanted nothing to do with queens who called themselves gods. So you were painted as a sinner, a temptress, the Jezebel of the Nile. Your intelligence was rebranded as cunning. Your political alliances became tawdry affairs. You were no longer a queen with a cabinet. You were a woman with a weakness for powerful men. But here's the irony. Even when they tried to insult you, they couldn't stop talking about you. In medieval Islamic literature, you sometimes appear as a wise queen or even a scientist. One famous alchemical text, the Cleopatra treatise, gets attributed to you, whether accurately or not. Suddenly, you're not a seductress. You're a philosopher, a master of transformation, a symbol of hidden knowledge. It's a flattering lens, though likely fictional. Still, the shift is fascinating. To some, you were dangerous because of your beauty. To others, because of your mind. Both versions terrified the men who recorded history. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and European scholars rediscover you again. But they can't decide whether to idolize or dissect you. Some marvel at your ability to hold power in a man's world. Others reduce your entire life to who you slept with. Voltaire called you a great soul. Others dismissed you as a pawn. The debate never ends. In the 19th century, during the Great Wave of Egyptomania, your story is retold in hushed tones inside gaslit theaters, painted in lurid colors across huge canvases. You're always glamorous, always tragic, always walking toward death in slow motion, with veils trailing and serpents gliding. The Victorians were obsessed with you, not because they admired your rule, but because they were terrified by what you represented: female agency, female intellect, female sovereignty. So they made you a fantasy instead, easier to control. And then came feminism. The 20th century brings a new lens, a new hunger for the Cleopatra who ruled, not just the one who kissed. Scholars begin pulling apart the layers of Roman propaganda, digging into the papyri, the tax records, the coinage. They find a Cleopatra who managed economic crises, coordinated trade routes, negotiated with kingdoms, and maintained political alliances in the middle of Rome's internal collapse. You weren't just surviving, you were managing chaos. You weren't an ornament, you were a stabilizer. And modern women start to claim you again. Not because you were perfect. You weren't. You made risky decisions. You tied your fate to doomed men. You ruled with opulence when the margins were thinning. But that's not the point. The point is that you tried. You fought to keep a dying empire alive. You made choices, you owned them. And when those choices led to ruin, you met your end with a kind of grace most rulers only dream of. That's the version that resonates now, the one that's messy and human and brilliant. The Cleopatra who used every tool available to her, who played a long game in a short-tempered world. The woman who navigated impossible expectations and still dared to rule in her own image. And that version? That's the legacy. Not the asp, not the gown, not the jewelry or the ship-shaped barge or the endless myths about her looks. The legacy is a woman in power who refused to apologize for it, a woman who used her mind as much as her presence. A queen who lived in the space between empires and made that space her own. Your name has been dragged through centuries of mud and gold, but it's still here, still shining, still said with a kind of awe, whether in classrooms or costume parties or quiet museums with low lights and ancient coins. You're the ruler no one could kill off completely, and every time your name is spoken, that's another small resurrection. So now we come to the question people have been quietly asking all along. Was Cleopatra a hero or a villain? Was she a political genius or a reckless romantic? Did she save Egypt, or did she doom it with pride? The answer, of course, is frustrating, because it's not either or, it's yes, to all of it. You were complicated, and the modern world, for all its advancements, still struggles to accept that a woman in power can be layered, flawed, brilliant, strategic, emotional, and unapologetically ambitious all at once. It's easier to pick a lane, hero or villain, angel or vixen, queen or something else. But you refuse to shrink that small. The truth is, you were a ruler shaped by crisis. You didn't inherit a golden empire. You inherited debt, famine, an exhausted populace, and a country squeezed between two empires, one collapsing, one expanding. And still, you held on for 2 decades. That's not luck. That's talent. That's instinct. That's pure force of will. You didn't make every right move, sure. Aligning yourself with Antony, politically, became a gamble that turned into a landslide. But you weren't making decisions in a vacuum. You were doing what every ruler before and after you has done, reading the room, playing the odds, trusting your experience. And unlike most rulers who lost, you didn't get erased. You became an argument. People still argue about you, not just in lecture halls and dusty journals, but on Twitter threads, in classroom debates, in magazine spreads and TikTok comments. Some people worship you, others call you overrated. Some think you were the greatest ruler Egypt ever saw. Others claim you were reckless, blinded by vanity and love. And the thing is, you probably would have loved that. Because as long as they're arguing about you, you're still in control. One of the most fascinating legacies you've left is the way modern women, and honestly, people of all genders, have found pieces of themselves in your story. The woman who walks into a boardroom with 10 times the credentials of her peers and still gets judged more for her clothes than her brain, she knows your pain. The girl balancing grace and ambition, called too much for daring to speak with authority, she's heard your story. The leader whose confidence is mistaken for arrogance, whose power is seen as threatening instead of earned. Cleopatra was there first. But it's not just struggle that defines you, it's style. You knew how to make an entrance. You understood that presence mattered as much as policy. That symbolism had weight. You turned your life into theater, but not because you were faking it, because you knew people believe what they can see. You turned appearances into weapons sharper than any Roman sword. That barge, remember that barge? The one you sailed down the river on to meet Antony the first time? Sails dyed purple, crew dressed as cupids, music floating through the reeds. You didn't have to do that. But you did, because spectacle wasn't just flair, it was strategy. You weren't there to beg for alliance. You were there to own the room, or in this case, the river. And it worked. Because every time you took control of the narrative, your wardrobe, your court, your lovers, you were bending reality in your favor. Rulers do that all the time. You were just better at it than most. And more importantly, you weren't afraid to do it while being visible, while being female, which made you dangerous to the people who could only imagine power as something masculine. That's why so many men throughout history had to reduce you to seduction. It wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. If they admitted you were intelligent, strategic, and a political match for Caesar or Antony, then they had to admit a woman could be their equal, or worse, their better. But if they could reduce you to beauty and perfume and romantic scheming, they didn't have to reckon with the more uncomfortable truth. You outplayed them, and they hated it. Even your enemies had to respect you. Octavian may have conquered Egypt, but he couldn't bring himself to parade your broken body through Rome. He didn't get the moment he wanted, didn't get to make you an example. You took that from him. He got the kingdom, sure, but you kept the narrative. That's a different kind of power. One that lasts. And now you belong to the world, not just as a queen or a myth, but as a lens. People look through Cleopatra to see what they value, what they fear, what they admire. They use you to measure beauty, wit, danger, ambition. You've become a shorthand for allure and also for ruthlessness. You are invoked in music lyrics, fashion lines, political speeches. You're the archetype that won't die. Even Beyoncé's been compared to you. And let's be honest, she'd probably do a stunning job in your crown. But the best part? Your story still isn't over. There are kids right now, in classrooms, on library floors, lying in bed, listening to your story. Hi, by the way. Just now discovering you for the first time. They're hearing about a queen who ruled when women weren't supposed to, who made decisions in a world designed to ignore her voice. They're seeing someone who didn't wait for approval, didn't wait for the perfect moment, didn't wait to be rescued. You were the rescuer. And when you couldn't rescue Egypt anymore, you made sure you left behind something bigger than a kingdom, a legacy. So was Cleopatra a hero or a villain? Honestly, that's the wrong question. She was a force. And forces don't ask for permission. They just arrive. Now we reach the quietest part of the story, the part after the storm, after the battles, after the lovers and the snakes and the coins and the coronations. This is where you truly become what you always knew you would. Legend. The dust has settled. The marble is cracked. The libraries are gone. The scrolls are ash. But Cleopatra, the idea of you, is still here. And in this final stretch of time, you stop being just a queen or a person or even a scandal. You become mythology. Not the kind told in temples, but the kind whispered in classrooms and stitched into pop culture like gold thread through black silk. Your name becomes something more than historical. It becomes useful. Nations, artists, rulers, and thinkers all begin invoking you for their own purposes. In revolutionary France, they see you as a fallen monarch, tragic, elegant, a lesson in the dangers of dynastic rule. During the women's suffrage movement, you're reimagined as a feminist icon, a woman who ruled in a time when the idea of a female head of state was as rare as rain in the desert. You're a sign that women have always had the capacity to lead, when they're not being silenced, sabotaged, or smeared by history books. The 20th century rolls on, and your name becomes shorthand for style, seduction, and strength. You show up in advertising, in magazines, in music videos. Eyeliner brands name their products after you. Costume parties honor you with sequins and foam snakes. Your silhouette becomes instantly recognizable, even when completely distorted. A gold headdress, a strong jaw, a woman sitting on a throne with her eyes narrowed, a plan already unfolding behind her smile. In academia, you finally get your due. More and more, scholars look past the Roman propaganda. They study the papyri, the tax records, the inscriptions in Egyptian temples that still call you pharaoh with the same reverence once given to Ramses and Hatshepsut. They analyze your letters, your coinage, your political maneuvers. They dig into your treaties, your famine relief plans, your patronage of science and learning. Slowly, you emerge, not just as a beautiful woman, but as a ruler, and a good one. Sure, not everything you did worked out. You gambled on Antony, and Rome didn't just beat him, it swallowed him whole. You died without securing a throne for your son. Your kingdom became a Roman province. But legacies aren't built on winning every battle. They're built on who remembers you afterward, and how. And let's just say you've got a pretty dedicated fan base. People are still looking for your tomb, still arguing about your race, your voice, your exact age at death. They're still casting you in films, still writing plays about you, still designing jewelry and lingerie and perfume based on what they imagine you wore. You've been in comic books and conspiracy theories, in poetry and pulp fiction. You're a woman of the past, and somehow you're still fashionably late to the future. The internet, of course, has given your myth new wings, memes, debates. What would Cleopatra do? T-shirts, Twitter threads that spark 1,000 comments, half of them incorrect, all of them passionate. A viral video of someone recreating your beauty routine, complete with honey, crushed pearls, and enough eyeliner to stop traffic. Another video questioning if you were, in fact, just a tool of imperialist patriarchy. It goes on. But somewhere beneath the noise, there's a truth that hums, steady and low, like the Nile itself. You mattered. You still matter. Not just because of who you ruled or how you died, but because of what you represent in a world that's always trying to rewrite women out of history the moment they get too powerful. You didn't fade. You echoed. In fact, your presence is so deeply rooted in modern culture that it's easy to forget you were real. A person, a teenager once, pacing barefoot in a palace, trying to read your father's expressions, trying to figure out what came next. A queen in your 20s, staring down Roman ambassadors, knowing every word had weight. A mother, sending your son away into the desert with guards and hope. A woman in a stone room, deciding when the story would end, and how. That's the part that sticks, the deciding. You were never a bystander in your own life. Never just someone swept along by fate. You chose, over and over. Not always wisely, but always clearly. You wrote your part in history with your own hand, and then made sure no one could erase it, only argue about it. That's power, that's empire, that's myth-making, and maybe that's the real lesson. Not how you ruled, not how you died, but that you never gave up your voice. You outlasted armies, you outlasted marble, you outlasted Octavian, whose monuments are now just cracked stones in Rome's dusty corners. You became more than your life, more than your death. You became a mirror for everyone else to see what they fear or admire about power, womanhood, ambition, control. You once called yourself Thea Philopator, goddess who loves her father. Then simply Cleopatra VII, daughter of the Nile. Later, you were known as the last pharaoh, the Queen of Kings. Today, they just call you Cleopatra. No last name, no title needed. And somehow that one word still carries more weight than most kingdoms. So here we are, at the end of the journey, and somehow you're still standing, aren't you? Or maybe reclining, one eyebrow arched, watching from the shadows of history as the world continues to say your name with equal parts awe and confusion. You've outlived dynasties, outlasted emperors, and survived more reputational overhauls than any celebrity could ever handle. And even now, no one can agree on who you really were. But maybe that's the trick. Maybe the power isn't in the facts. It's in the fact that we care enough to keep asking. Your story isn't one of perfection. It's one of persistence. You weren't always right, but you were always in motion, always adapting, always rewriting the rules to fit your shape. And that's the legacy. Not just a queen in gold, but a mind that never stopped working, never stopped wanting. Wanting control, wanting peace, wanting Egypt to stand just a little longer under the weight of the world. And now, as the night gets quiet and the room settles, we can let go of the debates for a moment. Let the historians argue tomorrow. For tonight, let's just picture her. Cleopatra, sitting at the edge of the Nile, stars above, torchlight flickering around her, plans forming like constellations in her mind. Still plotting, still dreaming, still reminding the world that even in death, she chose the ending. Sleep well, traveler. You've walked through empires tonight. You've survived poison and politics, parades and palace intrigue, love and loss and eyeliner sharp enough to kill a Caesar. And through it all, she stayed with you. Queen, icon, enigma,